What if love bloomed by accident?
Hello everyone, welcome to What If Belle Accidentally Fell in Love with Riveria Ljos Alf movie. Before we start, please go support Shadow Cranel Kun for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some mistaken character's gender, but of course Belle is a male. Our good friend Bell Cranel, after having gotten into the misunderstanding of the girls' bathroom on the 18th floor of the dungeon, meets a certain jade-haired elf princess. However, accidentally they end up in a very convenient situation, thus causing an event to unfold that will make them get closer and closer to each other. Chapter 1. Ha! Finally some time to relax, Riveria muttered, letting out a sigh as she slid into the water. She was currently bathing in the small lake on the 18th floor of the dungeon that Tiona had discovered and introduced to the family in the past. At first, Riveria had joined the other girls bathing here, but when she noticed that the other elves couldn't relax around her, as usual, she had stopped sharing this lake with them a long time ago, now only using it once both the other girls and the men of the family had had their turn. It was almost nighttime, or well, at least what would be seen as nighttime here on this floor, and it had taken her until now to find a free moment to come here and relax. Truthfully, if it weren't for Ace and the others urging her to rest, she would probably still be busy with her duties as the family leader or working herself to the bone in some other way. With the incident of a certain white-haired adventurer and his party joining her party, her workload had naturally increased even further. Bell Cranel, huh? Riveria muttered as she recalled when she and the other high-ranking members of the family had witnessed his fight with the Minotaur on the way down into the dungeon. Even someone as experienced as her had been amazed by this simple, yet incredibly beautiful, raw struggle of wills. If heroes existed in this world, she would have no doubt that he was one of them, or at least had the potential to become one at some point. To top it all off, it was undoubtedly his display of courage and heroism that allowed her and the other high-ranking members to prevail in their desperate fight against the corrupted spirit on the 59th floor. Now, of course, it was thanks to everyone giving their all, not just because of Belle's fight, but nonetheless, there was no way they would have been able to prevail in such a tough battle without the side of a true hero, one who kept fighting against overwhelming force, not budging in the slightest, no matter how hopeless the situation, flickering in their eyes. That was why he wished to thank him wholeheartedly. On top of that, he felt a little guilty for reading his statues back then, when he had fainted and was completely defenseless. These thoughts kept filling his mind when suddenly when he had fainted and was completely defenseless. These thoughts kept filling his mind when suddenly when he had fainted and was completely defenseless. These thoughts kept filling his mind when suddenly. Crack. Riveria quickly stood up and spun around in a fighting stance, expecting a monster to disturb her bathing. After all, she didn't have guards with her like the other members of her family did when they bathed. Of course, Riveria wasn't well suited to something wild like close combat, but she was a level 6 after all, so there was no way she'd lose to a monster on the 18th floor. That's also why she didn't bother asking anyone to guard her. She didn't want others to interfere in her business. But when Riveria faced what she expected to be a monster, she found herself facing Bell Cranel. Riveria burst out, unable to hide her surprise, immediately abandoning her fighting stance. Bell Cranel, the boy she had been thinking of, slowly stumbled out of the forest, looking as if he had just run a marathon. Huh? Miss Riveria was the only reaction the boy gave before his eyes began to roam over Riveria's naked body. Of course, he immediately started blushing like crazy, closed his eyes, and fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness. "I'm sorry." At first, Riveria didn't understand why he was apologizing, too surprised by her sudden appearance to fully comprehend what was happening, but she slowly realized what he meant. She immediately covered at least the most intimate parts of her body with her arms, falling back into the water to hide the rest of herself as best she could, her cheeks almost as red, if not redder, than Belle's. However, before he had a chance to say anything, he heard voices in the distance, the voices undoubtedly belonging to elven members of the Loki family. They're going to murder him. Riveria thought, knowing full well that he wouldn't be walking away with his life if they caught him. Now he certainly didn't know why they were angry at him and chasing him through the forest like that, but if there was one thing he could say for sure it was that these elves would never forgive him for catching a glimpse of Riveria's naked body. Regardless of why they had been chasing him in the first place, even if she tried to tell them that she was fine and therefore didn't want to see the adventurer who had saved her and her family get killed by the very people he had saved, she made a snap decision. Before he had a chance to run again, she grabbed his hand and pulled him towards the lake, pulling him tightly against her. Of course, he was caught off guard and tried to scream in surprise. They were now sitting in a rather awkward position. Riveria had wrapped her legs around Belle's lower body to pull him underwater as much as possible, while using one hand to keep his mouth closed and the other to press him tightly against her. Her hands were trapped between their bodies, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, they both ended up with their palms pressed against his bare chest. Luckily, dusk came just then, just seconds before several elves emerged from the forest, scanning the area for the fleeing white rabbit. "Lady Riveria?" one of them cried, quickly averting her eyes from the naked high elf in the lake. Soon enough, the rest of the elves also noticed Riveria's presence, averting their gazes, as if to disgrace their leader. It was only because the elves were so shy around Riveria, as well as because of how tightly she hugged him, that her pursuers didn't notice at that very moment. This was exactly what Riveria had hoped for. The elf who had first noticed Riveria, apparently the leader of the chase, asked, I'm sorry my lady, but did you perhaps see Bell Cranel running around here?" "Bell Cranel? No, I'm afraid I haven't seen him." Riveria replied in a cold and indifferent voice. "I see. In that case, we're sorry we interrupted your bath," the elven maiden shouted, before swiftly turning on her heels and running off into the forest again. Her comrades quickly followed suit, all of them soon continuing their search for the poor boy. Now they obviously had their suspicions, given that they had all heard a loud noise earlier, almost as if someone had fallen into the water, but who were they to doubt Rivera's words? If he said he hadn't seen Bell Cranel, they could only take his word for it. Riveria waited a few more moments, all the while pressing Bell tightly against her body so he wouldn't do anything stupid that might alert the other elves again, before finally releasing the boy, breathing a sigh of relief. Naturally, Bell was completely dumbfounded and embarrassed by the current situation. Thank you." He thanked Riveria wholeheartedly, before adding, I mean for saving me, not for pressing me against your body. Oh, it's not like I didn't enjoy that too. I mean, soon turning into a stuttering, apologetic mess. Meanwhile, Riveria had once again covered her body with her hands. However, she tried to calm the embarrassed rabbit, despite her own shame at having someone she barely knew, a human, no less, touch such intimate places on her body. "Oh, it's okay, Mr. Cranel. It was my decision, after all." After a while, the two fell into an awkward silence. Finally, somewhat calmed again, Bell stood up from his sitting position by the lake again, preparing to leave, as he knew he was making Riveria feel exposed and uncomfortable. However, before he could leave, Riveria called out to him, "Stay here, Mr. Cranel." Of course, Bell was confused by this, staring at Riveria in astonishment. Naturally, she blushed even more when looked at like that. I mean, you have to stay here a little longer since the other elves have left this part of the forest," the blushing beauty added. Oh yeah, I suppose it would be wise," Bell said, awkwardly looking away from Riveria once more, realizing once again that he had been looking at her like some kind of pervert. Also, you need to take off your clothes." Huh? Hearing such a statement, Bell couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Nonetheless, the embarrassed but calm elf explained, "We need your clothes to dry. Otherwise, people will come up with strange theories once you return to camp." "Well, these elves, trust me, they're certainly not stupid. I'm sure they noticed at least the sound of you falling into the lake, so if you come back with wet clothes, it might not end well for you." That made perfect sense, so Bell really had no room to argue. Clumsily, he began to undress until he was naked as well, his clothes now left to dry on the lakeshore. Naturally, he also quickly sank into the water to hide his body from Riveria. Of course, it wasn't as if she had tried to look at him. There they sat for a few awkward, silent moments, only the sound of water flowing around them breaking the silence. "Thank you for doing this for me, Miss Riveria," Bell finally said, adding, "I know that elves are quite reserved when it comes to things like nudity, even more so than us humans. Despite that, not only did you allow me to stay here, you even put up with me pressing against you to save me." Riveria was slightly surprised by his words. She hadn't expected him to show such a level of understanding toward her and other elves. Hearing his words brought a faint smile to her lips. "Don't worry too much about it, Mr. Cranel. I learned long ago not to take such matters too seriously. That kind of thinking will only create barriers between you and your family members," she comforted him, adding, "Also, please call me Riveria. You must be one of the first men to see and touch my body in this state, so I would prefer if you addressed me in a more private manner than with a red face." Belle blushed even more when she mentioned his current naked state, but nonetheless, her words managed to calm him down a little. It's okay, me, I don't mean, Riveria." Oh, and you can call me Bell too if you wish," he replied. After that brief exchange, silence settled once again, though at least it wasn't as awkward as before, with both of them a little less tense. Finally, breaking the silence, Riveria asked, "Bell, would you mind washing my hair for me?" I mean, I wouldn't mind, but why a request like that all of a sudden?" Bell asked, clearly surprised by her request. Now the truth is, Riveria wanted to be on par with him. She still felt guilty about seeing his statues after their fight, and while she couldn't show him hers because it was locked, even without considering that he wouldn't be able to read it anyway, she at least wanted to give him the chance to see it if she had any way of doing so. She hoped it would make him feel at least a little less guilty. Of course she didn't tell him that. Instead, she said, "Consider it a reward for saving you. From what I can tell about your personality so far, I imagine you'd otherwise be hooked on the whole thing, so you can see us even after you're done." Oh yeah, I see what you mean. I guess I would have kept thinking about that, Bell had to admit. Without another word, Riveria moved towards him, still keeping her private parts covered as much as possible, before turning around once she was closer to Bell, presenting her hair and back to him. Meanwhile, Bell sat on the edge so he could work Riveria's hair from above. Well, that and maybe there was something he hoped to hide from her by creating some distance between them, something that might otherwise have hit the elf in his back. Unaware of her circumstances, Riveria simply waited for him to begin washing her hair, and not wanting to refuse his kind offer, Bell had no choice but to comply with his request, even though his erect penis was coming dangerously close to touching Riveria in the process. Of course, Bell was clumsy at washing his hair, but Riveria didn't mind that too much. While he wasn't good at cleaning her hair, he was certainly gentle and took care not to hurt or offend her in any way. It was truly more than Riveria had expected from any adventurer, especially someone as young and inexperienced with women as Bell. "Bell, why were they chasing you?" Riveria asked, trying to make small talk while washing his hair. Besides, she was curious about what had happened, and there was a good chance she'd have to deal with it once she got back to camp anyway. Well, you see, Lord Hermes dragged me along to spy on the other girls bathing. Oh, of course, I didn't know that. He just said he wanted to show me something, I swear. If only he had known I would have refused. But anyway, someone noticed me while I was in the middle of leaving, and then everyone started chasing after me, Bell stammered, trying to explain. Meanwhile, Riveria listened calmly to her story. Letting out a sigh, she said, "I see. So that's what happened, huh? Well, in that case, don't worry about it. Well, I can certainly understand the other girls resenting you for it. It wasn't your fault by any means, so I'll try to get these girls to calm down. I don't take you for a pervert, so I believe your story." Lemon skipped. Chapter 2. It seemed that Bell had run back to the camp immediately after he had left Riveria. At least, Riveria couldn't think of any other way to explain how he had managed to patch things up with the elves, who had been chasing him earlier in the short time it had taken him to regain his senses and return. Truth be told, Bell had taken quite a beating from them, but he'd still managed to explain himself while they beat him up, which ultimately led to his name being cleared. It might seem strange that he'd actually gone straight to the elves chasing him a few minutes earlier, knowing full well what to expect, but he'd done it for Riveria. Or well, at least he'd done it to take some work off her shoulders, clearly an attempt to pacify her, since Bell, who hadn't seen her reaction and hadn't heard her words when she'd recovered from her face, was pretty sure that she'd murder him once she got here. That was why he'd chosen the lesser of two evils over her. After all, a few level 4s wouldn't hurt him as much as one level 6. However, to his surprise, Riveria didn't seem too intent on revenge. At least not in an obvious way. When she returned from her bath, she was clean again, to no one's surprise, of course. After all, she could barely walk back to camp with her face covered in semen and didn't seem particularly concerned about Bell, perhaps even trying to ignore him. Meanwhile, the time between Bell falling into the girls' bathing lake and his adventure with Riveria, the werewolf bed, had returned from the surface with the antidote to treat the poisoned family members, thus clearing the only obstacle the Loki familia had left that had prevented them from returning to the surface. Din and Gareth had waited for Riveria's opinion before announcing it, but it was practically decided that, with their limbs healed, they would ascend the following morning. Of course, Riveria had no reason to oppose that decision, so it was agreed upon unanimously. Now Loki family wouldn't be Loki family if they didn't celebrate their members' successful recovery with a party. While they certainly could never recreate the parties they occasionally threw at their favorite bar and pub, they certainly wouldn't let something like that stop them. Everyone was in high spirits, and the celebration began almost immediately once Riveria returned from her swim. Everyone gathered around the large fireplace in the middle of the camp, sharing laughter and joking with each other. Naturally, that included Bell and his group as well. Just like everyone else, they shared the joy and celebrated to their heart's content. The further the night progressed, the more joyful and noisy their celebrations became. Everyone gorged themselves on as many sweet dungeon fruits as they could, and plenty of alcohol was consumed, which had been purchased in the rough town of Riviera, despite the exorbitant price. Naturally, neither Bell nor Riveria got drunk, one was still too young, and the other wasn't a fan of alcohol. To be honest, while Riveria looked calm and collected on the outside, as expected of a leader, she was quite shaken up by the recent events on the inside. She felt confused by her own feelings and really, with how confused Riveria was on the inside with her feelings, she was certainly tempted to escape said confusion with some alcohol but given that she hardly ever drank, she certainly had no idea how much she could handle and really, she was scared of what she might do if she got lost. Maybe she would get all whiny and sentimental, something that definitely wouldn't fit with her image as a leader, or maybe she would be similar to A's, becoming too violent into something that would also be bad. Riveria shuddered just thinking about it, so naturally she stayed away from alcohol during the celebrations. She was sitting next to Gareth and Finn, so she didn't really need to deal with Bell. However, she still couldn't help it and had to glance at him out of the corner of her eye every now and then. Of course, doing so only made her even more confused and it certainly didn't help that he was basically surrounded by other girls all the time. Odd, what's wrong with me? Am I some kind of jealous teenager? Pull yourself together, Riveria. She mentally scolded herself, shaking her head in annoyance. Speaking of annoyance, just at that moment Bet approached her, obviously carrying more than just the first bottle of beer by now. Hey, you old hag, where have you been before? I heard you were kicking around and taking it easy while I was working. Bet said, her voice already swaying and cracking from the alcohol in her bloodstream. Riveria let out a sigh, one of her eyes closing as if to ward off a headache. Bet, you're clearly drunk. Go get some sleep and sober up, okay? Oh, and for your information, I was taking a bath, something you should consider doing more often, she told him in her usual stern, but not angry, tone. A bath? What kind of bath was that supposed to be? You stink. Bet declared. Only then did a small light begin to shine in his eyes, almost as if he'd regained some intelligence he'd previously lost with the bottle in his hand. He leaned forward and began to sniff Riveria, his eyes widening slightly as he turned and looked in Bell's direction and then back at Riveria in disbelief. Riveria managed to maintain his outward appearance calm thanks to his years of training, but internally he was sweating bullets at this point. He knows, right? I can't believe I didn't think of that. Even if I cleaned myself up, an animal person could still smell it, even more so with a scent as strong as this. Riveria panicked. Now, well I'm certainly quite lenient with you, you should learn to watch your words. Otherwise, I'll really have to punish you someday. Also, give in to that inner pervert of yours and stop smelling like an idiot to me, she replied, hoping she could stop the conversation there. Fortunately for her, it seemed to work. Bet frowned, almost as if thinking, no way. It's not like anyone would want that old hag anyway, and then finally took another swig from her bottle and walked away again. Riveria breathed a sigh of relief when Bet left, though to the people around her, it must have seemed as though she had just been relieved of a nuisance and sighed at that. Both Finn and Gareth gave her sympathetic smiles, and Riveria smiled wryly in return, glad this was over. Nonetheless, she decided to go to bed early now, rather than stay here and be exposed to all the animals' sensitive noses. She walked into her tent and lay there for a while, trying to fall asleep, but she just couldn't. It wasn't because of the commotion outside, although that was certainly part of it too, but rather because of her own confusing feelings. She could only lie there, alone with her thoughts as the seconds turned into minutes and eventually hours. Try as she might, she couldn't sleep, even after the commotion around her tent had died down and people had begun to separate from the party, eventually leading to everyone ending up back in their respective tents. Finally, she couldn't help it anymore. She tried to push every single thought of Bell and his little accident out of her head, but they kept coming back anyway, and so she finally decided to let them in, too tired to cope anymore. Lemon skipped. Chapter 3. The next morning was difficult for Riveria. While she had certainly enjoyed the events of last night, she hadn't been able to calculate one thing, or probably more than one thing, but who's counting anyway, that one thing being Bell's semen. The day before, Bet had definitely been able to smell Bell on her, even after she'd washed, but now not only had she not bathed, she hadn't even cleaned up the night before. Meaning the scent of semen had had an entire night to seep into her skin. Even Riveria herself could tell. Just one breath was enough to clearly identify the strong stench of semen all over her body. If there's one thing for sure, then it's that now not only the animals, but everyone would be able to know what happened last night. Well, I mean, they probably wouldn't be able to tell whose semen she had bathed in, but it certainly didn't make her current acquisition any better. Deciding that she simply wouldn't be able to deal with all the teasing, or worse, from the others, Riveria snuck out of the camp as quickly as possible, pretending to still be asleep so she could take a bath. Since they had planned to leave sooner rather than later, Riveria didn't have much time and could only clean herself as best as possible, fully aware that her efforts would never be enough to bring the animals in her family to their senses. But she at least wanted to appear normal to the rest of her family. Fortunately, or maybe unfortunately. For her, Bell didn't surprise her this time, so she managed to finish her bath quickly. She made sure to scrub herself until she could no longer smell his stench on her body, which meant that at least no one other than the animals would be able to tell. By the time she returned to camp, the rest of her family had already woken up and gotten to work in the meantime. As Riveria walked through the camp to help with preparations for the departure, every single animal that passed her turned around, staring at her in bewilderment, causing her to blush as more and more gazes focused on her. Her blush clearly showed that she knew very well what the others could smell on her. However, there was still a glimmer of hope for her. While the animal people could definitely tell that she had been covered in semen recently, there was a chance they wouldn't be able to tell it had been Bell's semen, given that they had lower statuses than Bet. At least the other races didn't seem to notice anything, though they certainly seemed curious as to what made all the animal people so interested in Riveria all of a sudden. Anyway, the preparations were soon over, and the first group of 2 in total surfaced. The members of each group had been chosen by the family leaders, or well mostly by Finn, since he knew best about each individual member. The only thing anyone had vetoed was including Bet in the first group to depart. Riveria had made a strong point about dividing the level 5 and 6 members into equal teams, with herself in the first and Bet in the second. So far, she had managed to avoid running into him, and she planned to use every option available to keep it that way. After all, unlike the other animal people, there was no way he would have the courtesy to remain silent about the smell of semen on her, let alone whose semen it was. Of course, being in the second group also meant he wouldn't be ascending with Bell, but that had also been part of his plan. After all, it would essentially be like shouting, "We got laid last night," to all the animals around them. After all, none of them would be stupid enough to recognize the source of the smell all over Riveria if it were right next to them. Of course, it wasn't as if they'd actually slept together, but there was no way for those around them to know. Besides, masturbating together wasn't that far removed from Hex anyway. Anyway, Riveria and the rest of her group set off soon and reached the surface without any major difficulties. While they were in the upper levels of the dungeon, they noticed a brief shake in the dungeon, making them wonder what had happened. Then again, it wasn't as if anyone particularly cared, as most of them were focused on Riveria and her scent the animal folk anyway. Naturally, Riveria didn't mind the tremor either. She was too busy trying not to die of sheer embarrassment while enduring what could be called her personal walk of shame. Only later would she realize that she should have cared about the tremor after all, as it was the starting point for yet another heroic feat by her lover. Time skip. After the events on the 18th floor and Riveria's departure from said floor, Riveria hadn't seen Bell again. She had no idea where his family home was, and even if she did, she would have made it a point to go there and meet him. Of course, it goes without saying that Bell couldn't just walk into the Loki family home to pick her up for a date either. And so, instead of trying to meet him, Riveria told herself it had all just been a matter of the heat of the moment for both of them. It had really just been curiosity on her part, no other feelings, really. She saw him as a formidable adventurer, no more, no less. Someone from whom she expected great things someday. Speaking of expectations, given what she'd heard about their fight on the 18th floor, those expectations definitely weren't misplaced. She heard about their heroic deeds day after day, especially from Tiona, who had taken a special liking to Bell, her Argonaut. Riveria had learned all the details Tiona could somehow get, and she had to admit that he really did sound like a hero straight out of a fairy tale. And just when I thought the talk about him was dying down, he got involved in another incident. The war game? Riveria asked, doubting her ears. Yes. Argonaut is going to fight the Apollo family. Tiona shouted excitedly. Riveria let out a sigh. Oh, don't be silly, Tiona. You don't seriously think anyone would be okay with that, do you? They barely even have their own families yet, so do you really think the guild would allow Apollo to mess with them like that? But it's true. Tiona insisted. I'm even going to train Argonaut together with Ace. Really? Are you sure it's okay? I think Finn wouldn't be too happy about that. Riveria voiced her opinion, still hesitant about the whole wargame thing. Oh, shoot. It was supposed to be a secret. Well, I have to go now. Ayo, please don't tell Finn, okay? Tiona asked, awkwardly rubbing the back of her neck before running off, presumably to train with Bell. Ridiculous. As if that's going to happen, Riveria muttered, clearly unable to believe Tiona. Only when he heard about it from others did he realize that the war game was actually happening, and that's when his worries began. At first, it wasn't much. A little less sleep than usual, nothing more. She didn't worry about him at all. Only when she walked around town and heard people talking about the upcoming war game did she occasionally think about him. However, the more time progressed towards the scheduled day of the game, the more she began to worry. He's a hero. Even against all odds, he'll surely prevail. I mean, even if he loses, it's not like he'll disappear or anything, she told herself as she lay in bed at night, unable to fall asleep. As the days progressed, things went from bad to worse. Now it wasn't just sleepless nights. She was even unfocused in her daily life and began failing at even some of her most routine tasks, something her family members definitely noticed. Their usually reliable leader was now becoming increasingly distracted, her thoughts so far away at times that she almost began to appear clumsy to those around her. Naturally, everyone wondered what had happened. Everyone, especially the elves, worried about her. Only the animal folk had any idea what could be distracting her so much, but for now, they kept their mouths shut, despite being questioned by the family elves time and time again. Riveria's absent-mindedness and clumsiness reached the point where she was almost completely unable to fulfill her duties. Maybe you should take a break for a few days. You don't look so well. Make sure you get some rest, Finn had told her. Obviously, she'd tried to refuse, but with Gareth supporting Finn, she had to admit that she should certainly step away from her duties for a while. After all, she couldn't allow the other members of the family to see one of their leaders fall apart like this. However, even if Riveria had accepted his decision to take a break, things didn't improve or even the opposite. Riveria now had a lot more free time, which meant a lot more time to worry and agonize over Bell and the upcoming wargame. Finally, on Bell's last day of training with Ace and Tiona, the day before he left for the playground, Riveria simply couldn't take it anymore. Finally admitting that she couldn't let him go, she decided to visit Ace and Tiona. She knew very well where they were. After all, there was no doubt they would be at Ace's secret training spot atop the city wall. It was almost nighttime and when she reached the high wall, she saw Bell, Ace and Tiona walking towards her, the latter two clearly surprised to see her here and the former too exhausted and beaten up to even notice. "Riveria? What are you doing here?" Ace asked, tilting her head to the side in her characteristic manner. Riveria did her best to remain calm, though truly at this moment she wanted nothing more than to heal the boy currently leaning on Ace. Focusing in on herself, she said, "I'd like to speak with Mr. Cranel for a moment if possible. There's something I need to tell you privately if possible. Don't worry, you may continue. I'll take care of your injuries while I'm at it as well." Bell could only weakly raise his head in response to Riveria's voice, though there was certainly a faint blush on his cheeks when he looked into her eyes. Ace and Tiona exchanged a glance, clearly surprised by Riveria's request, as they certainly didn't think she had a real connection with him. Adding to the fact that they hadn't been there to witness the effects of Riveria's concern, too preoccupied with training, they certainly couldn't understand her actions. Yet they trusted their trusted leader and mother figure. "It's fine," Ace gave one of her usual short replies before helping, or rather dragging, the exhausted adventurer to Riveria. Bell certainly didn't know what to make of this situation either, but he wasn't in a position to refuse Riveria's request anyway, so he leaned weakly towards her for support now, rather than Ace, the feel of her soft skin and scent undoubtedly stirring memories of their shared night in his mind as his blush began to intensify. Riveria was certainly not affected by his touch either, as a small blush began to spread across her face as well. Only then did Ace and Tiona realize. Why was Riveria allowing him to touch her? "Is this okay?" Ace asked, feeling bad for completely forgetting the fact that elves were quite reserved about letting others touch them. Riveria certainly wasn't that keen on such matters, but seeing her blush like that, they both assumed she wasn't exactly happy about Bell clinging to her like that. "And no, it's okay. I was the one who asked for this anyway. Now you two go home, I'm sure the others are already waiting for you," Riveria told them, dismissing their worries. "Well fine, if you say so," Tiona replied, soon dragging Ace along, who was still unsure of what to do. When the two disappeared from her sight, Riveria began walking toward one of the abandoned buildings surrounding them. This part of town wasn't as lively as it used to be, meaning there were quite a few abandoned buildings around. That was also the reason why Ace used this place to train Bell, as hardly anyone ever came by. What is the meaning of this, Riveria? Did she do something? Bell asked, forcing the words out from his battered body. "SHH. You need to rest now. Let's talk once you're healed," Riveria told him in a stern but kind voice, clearly showing that it pained her to see him like this too. Bell didn't mind either, as he would certainly be grateful for any kind of healing at this point. The pair soon arrived inside the nearby buildings. Riveria quickly let Bell sit down before beginning to cast her healing magic on him, in her worried state, clearly using far more power than she actually needed, as his wounds healed in seconds. "Thank you," Bell told her, clearly feeling better now that all the pain was gone and his wounds were healed. Riveria seemed to feel better about it too, as she gave him a faint smile. "So? What brought you here?" Bell asked, repeating his earlier question. Riveria didn't respond, not knowing what to say. She just blushed even more and looked away. Bell, on the other hand, couldn't understand her strange behavior, waiting for her to speak eventually. "You will be leaving for the wargame tomorrow, right?" Riveria finally asked. "Yes, I will. I'll have to give it my all for my goddess," Bell replied, his determination clearly showing. However, despite his answer, Riveria couldn't help but ask, "Hey, are you sure you want to do this? What other options do I have?" "I don't think Apollo will leave me alone if I don't follow through with this," Bell told him. Well, I mean. I could help you. I mean, Finn didn't like the idea of getting involved here because it would put the family in a bad place, but I'm sure I can talk to him. We can become our family and…" Riveria tried to persuade him, trailing off midway. Even she realized that, right now, none of that was possible. For starters, the fact that she suggested endangering her own family showed just how scared she was scared of losing Bell. Bell silently shook his head, rejecting her offer. "I have to do this now. There's no other way," Bell told her with determination in his voice, looking like he was a soldier preparing for war, not knowing if he'd ever see his family again. Of course, in a sense, he really was a soldier heading off to war. Seeing him like this, Riveria couldn't help it any longer. She burst into tears, her usual dignified and refined appearance almost gone, and she hugged him tightly. Of course, Bell was completely surprised by his sudden change of mood, too stunned to react properly. Only after a moment did he wrap his arms around her, accepting her embrace and holding her close. He stroked her back gently, almost as if he were trying to comfort a child. Riveria, on the other hand, was just sobbing quietly into his shoulder when she felt the heat coming off him. The two of them stayed like that for a while, only Riveria's sobs filling the room. It was only thanks to Bell's comforting and calming aura that Riveria finally managed to calm down. In the end, her sobs disappeared, but nonetheless, she continued to hold him tightly. I don't know what this is, I barely know you, but I'm scared of losing you," Riveria finally whispered into his ear, admitting her feelings. Of course, she herself was also confused by those feelings. How could she feel so much concern for someone she barely knew? For someone she had yet to share anything more than a few days with? It was completely irrational, and she couldn't really understand it. Then again, feelings never had much to do with rationality to begin with. "Alright. I'll win, and I'll come back to you. Definitely," Bell told her with confidence in his voice. It was clear as day that his experiences up to this day had definitely helped him grow as a person. If he had still been his self from the week before his training with Ace and Tiona, before the incident on the 18th floor, before his battle with the Minotaur, he would have been hopelessly lost in a situation like this, but now he was able to comfort the crying, worried girl in his arms and reassure her. And really, if he had had any doubts about his own success before, they were gone now, as he was sure he could never accept seeing Riveria cry like that again. "Promise?" Riveria asked, calmer now, though obviously still not convinced. Bell now pulled away from her to look into her eyes, conveying his own resolve. "I promise," Bell said in a firm voice. Only now did Riveria finally manage to smile at him. "Okay, I believe you," she replied. The two were silent for a moment after that. "Well, I guess I should go now, huh? I still need to update my status and get a good night's rest before departure," Bell said. "Yeah, sure," Riveria replied, resisting the urge to ask to stay with him tonight. She knew full well that neither of them would rest like that, and after all, it was crucial for him to be in shape. Just as Bell stood up from his sitting position and prepared to leave, Riveria hugged him once more, this time pulling him into a deep passionate kiss. Of course, Bell was surprised, but he kissed her back enthusiastically nonetheless. Naturally, upon sharing that kiss with Riveria, his pants also began to tighten. That didn't go unnoticed by Riveria either. She broke their kiss and once again hugged him tightly. "I know you need all the sleep you can get now, so we'll both have to deal with ourselves tonight, I'm afraid," she told him, implying that it wasn't just him who was aroused thanks to her kiss. Riveria then leaned forward to whisper softly into his ear, almost as if she were mocking him, though she really only meant it as an incentive for him to win. "But I'm sure that can be changed once you return to me and keep your promise. Since you promised to return me safely, allow me to promise myself something as well. If you return victories, I'll give you my first time." Of course, such a thing wasn't an easy promise to make, especially considering Riveria had been a virgin for almost a century, however, it only showed how much it truly meant to her. They both separated after that, their cheeks clearly reddened, however, they both smiled at each other. "Are you sure?" Bell asked, clearly understanding how difficult it was to make that promise. "Yes, I am," Riveria told him with a loving look. I can accept that promise, you know. There's no way I'm going to lose like this," Bell told her, embarrassed but clearly happy that she considered him worthy of her virginity. It seemed to have worked perfectly as an incentive for him, just as Riveria had intended. They finally separated for real after that, both leaving the abandoned building, one heading off to war, the other staying behind, feeling anxious about their partner, but having blind faith in their safe return. Time skip. The war game itself was something she watched with her family, meaning Riveria didn't exactly cry tears of happiness when Bell delivered the finishing blow to the Apollo family captain. Nonetheless, her heart screamed with pure joy and relief at that moment. Immediately after Hestia Familia was announced as the victor, she began preparations for Bell's return and for the day she would fulfill her promise to him. Time skip. It wasn't until a week after that Riveria was able to see Bell again. After all, he and his family had a lot to deal with right now. Of course, another reason for that was that they hadn't agreed on a place or day to meet, so there's that. They simply crossed paths on the large main street leading to the guild, Bell leading the way with his family and Riveria heading to the guild on official business. Upon seeing him, she quickly grabbed him by the shoulder to pull him close and whispered in his ear, "Tonight at the abandoned building," before quickly continuing their walk. While it might have seemed pretty obvious what she was doing, thanks to her speed as a level 6 adventurer and Bell's new level as well, none of her other family members seemed to have noticed. If anything, all they saw was a flustered Bell looking at an already distant Riveria. Time skip. That night, Bell snuck out of his new home, with his goddess and the rest of his friends already asleep. Since he was now level 3, none of them really had a chance to see him anyway, but he was careful not to wake them. Truth be told, Bell was quite anxious. He obviously knew why Riveria had arranged this meeting, and while he certainly wanted this, he was still scared. After all, he didn't want to disappoint her, nor did he want to hurt or offend her. Nonetheless, he was now confident and brave enough not to run away. No matter what happened tonight, he wouldn't leave her hanging. When Bell finally arrived at the abandoned building they'd once promised each other, he found Riveria already there. She was wearing a long coat covering almost her entire body. Only her bare feet and hooded face were visible to Bell. "Riveria?" Bell called after her, her strange attire undoubtedly confusing him. "Hey Bell. I think you're ready for me to keep my promise tonight," he asked, his face clearly flushed beneath his hood. "Why yeah, but what's that hood about?" Bell replied. Riveria smiled at that before saying, "I think you'll really enjoy this," before dropping the coat to the floor, revealing that she was wearing a hexy and very risque piece of lingerie. It looked almost like a nightgown, but it was mostly made of a sheer jade green material, which matched Riveria's hair color. It was quite short, meaning it barely covered her bare bottom, not that Bell would have seen this from his position, and her stomach was completely bare, almost as if the top and bottom of the nightgown could be worn separately from each other, meaning that not only did it look amazing on her, but it was also easy for Bell to remove later. Of course, Bell was completely stunned, and if he hadn't managed to keep his mouth shut, he might have started salivating all over the floor, thanks to Riveria's outfit. Naturally, seeing Riveria's flushed face and her struggle to keep from covering herself, doing her best to reveal her body to him, only made it that much better for Bell. Riveria had gone through a lot to get her hands on this, it was a costume made by one of the best artisans in the city after all. She had gone to the trouble of paying the woman 5 times the required amount, as she didn't want anyone finding out about this, and not only that, she had even modeled nude for the woman to make sure that this garment turned out to the best of its ability. At least that way she had gotten to know the woman better, which meant that she could now be more or less assured that she wouldn't let anything about this purchase leak out, after all she could do without rumors spreading that she had a lover, especially given how rumors tended to run rampant and exaggerated. She was almost certain that if a rumor had leaked out that she had purchased a piece of lingerie, it would soon turn into people saying, "Did you hear? Riveria sleeps with her lover almost every night, really? I heard she's doing it with multiple men at the same time. And even didn't you hear? Apparently she's basically a bore now. I heard she's already slept with his entire family." Obviously, she could really do without those rumors. Seeing that Bell was still too stunned to move, Riveria finally spoke. "I went to see Amid before this and asked him to make sure that today was safe, so there's no need to hold back," blushing even more in the process, nevertheless trying to encourage Bell to touch her. In fact, she'd gone to see Amid and made sure she wouldn't get pregnant after that night. At least with Amid, she could be 100% sure she'd be discreet about it after all, she was a capable healer to the core. Riveria's words finally seemed to snap Bell out of his stunned silence, as he adored such a divine sight, once again making him realize that his wasn't a dream and that he would be sleeping with a goddess like this tonight. Thanks to all the efforts Riveria went through, he was now rock hard and could hardly contain himself anymore. Without another word, he walked over to Riveria, hugging her tightly and kissing her passionately, one of his hands already moving down to begin exploring her body, something he hadn't had the chance to do yet. Lemon skipped. Finally they both left the old building. The next morning at a certain new rabbit home. "Thanks for updating my status so early in the morning, goddess," Bell said, lying face down with his upper body bare. His goddess replied with, "No problem, Bell. With all our new members I couldn't do it yesterday, but at least I can do it." "No, is it a new ability?" "What? A skill? What's a goddess?" Bell asked, obviously excited by this development, though he certainly couldn't think of anything extraordinary he could have done in the dungeon that would have earned him this skill. Hestia didn't respond for a moment. Instead, she looked at him and soon cried out, Beel. Chapter 4. Just what happened? Bell wondered as he stood outside his new home with a bag of clothes and his gear by his side. Thinking back to this morning, just when Hestia, his goddess, had updated his status and suddenly started yelling at him. She had accused him of cheating and sleeping around. Now, well, he certainly couldn't deny the last part, even though it was just one person he slept with, he couldn't possibly achieve what he'd meant by cheating after all, he didn't have anyone to cheat with to begin with. To Bell, who couldn't see the love between gods and humans as possible, it seemed like a ridiculous idea for him to be cheating. If anything, it would be cheating on Riveria, but Hestia didn't even know about their relationship, so Bell certainly couldn't understand what she meant. Anyway, Hestia had been so upset with him that she told him to pack his things and leave, as she wasn't sure if she wanted him as part of the family. Of course, Bell had been heartbroken to hear that this was, after all, his home, his family. However, it didn't seem like his goddess was going to be swayed that easily, and the other members of his familia had also told him that it would be wise to leave for now, and that they would do their best to talk some sense into Hestia, though Lily certainly didn't seem happy either for some reason. What a mess, Bell muttered, grabbing his bag and trotting off. Lacking a better place to go, he decided to spend the next few nights in the abandoned building where he and Riveria had their first experience yesterday. Time to return to Riveria. Returning home last night, Riveria was still walking on clouds as she approached Twilight Manor. She could still feel Bell's semen inside her, further increasing her happiness as it constantly reminded her of the bond they shared and what had happened between them. Really, if it weren't for the outward appearance, she might even have been humming a happy tune right now. Speaking of outward appearance, she had of course changed into her normal clothes back in the old building, instead of putting back on her hexy lingerie, and, not wanting to repeat the situation where basically every animal person in the family could smell Bell all over her, she had even put on a bit of perfume, something she only did very reluctantly, since she hated such an artificial smell around her. And again, if it allowed her to be with Bell and experience such happiness, she certainly didn't mind. When she returned home, after successfully chasing off all the guards, she was greeted by her vermilion-haired goddess, Loki, waiting for her at the grand staircase leading to the upper chambers. "Hey Mama Riveria. Are you back yet?" Loki asked in his usual mocking tone. "I've told you 1,000 times, I don't understand why you call me Mom," Riveria told him, clearly annoyed but not entirely angry. After all, she was already used to her goddess's teasing. Riveria walked up the stairs without hesitation, acting as if it was the most normal thing in the world for her to come home now in the middle of the night, hoping Loki wouldn't question her. "Where have you been? I certainly didn't hear anything from Finn or Gareth that you'd be out so late," Loki asked her when he was at her side, his tone more serious this time, clearly showing that he cared for his children and was worried about Riveria, despite how mature Riveria might have already been. "Of course I couldn't let it go," Riveria sighed internally. "It's just a personal matter, there's nothing to worry about, which is why I didn't tell Finn, Gareth or you directly." "There's no need for you to worry uselessly," Riveria told him, stopping by his side as best she could. She told him that this conversation wouldn't end with such a simple exchange. Loki smiled again, showing that he at least understood that it wasn't something to worry about. Nonetheless, he felt like teasing Riveria a little more. Is that perfume I smell? Did you go on a date? Did you finally find a lover?" he said in poorly acted shock. "Jay, what a dumb idea. Do you want me to hit you?" Riveria told him, clearly defensive about the matter. Then again, it was quite normal for her to react this way whenever Loki teased her about not having a boyfriend or husband yet. "Oh? Are you sure?" Loki asked the green-haired elf. At least she tried to before she quickly found herself punched in the head, sending her tumbling down the stairs. Riveria resumed her walk to her room. The next day. Riveria's happiness was easy for the rest of the family to see, though of course, they didn't know what had caused her so much happiness. Naturally, some people asked, but she simply gave dismissive answers like, "Why would I need any reason to be happy?" Or, "Oh, it's such a wonderful day, you know. How can you not be happy today?" Riveria's schedule was packed with work to finish and places to visit today, so she was mostly out of the house that day. It wasn't until nightfall that she returned to her room to find the gift, Riveria muttered after entering her room. There, on top of her bed, she found a small package with a letter attached. Her heart skipped a moment, suspecting that it might have been Bell who had brought this here. However, once she began reading the attached letter, she soon discovered that this wasn't from Bell. The letter read as follows. "Dear Riveria. You may be able to hide things from others, but you can't lie to a goddess, you should know that by now. However, make no mistake, I'm the last person who'll stand in your way. In fact, I'm very happy that you've finally found someone you like. However, it would be much better if he were part of this family. In case that lover of yours needs help, bring him here, I'd be happy to have him join the family. Your amazing all-knowing goddess Loki. Riveria let out a sigh. She knew full well she couldn't lie to a goddess, yet she'd still told herself that Loki had bought her lies yesterday. Well, she's surprisingly mature about this, Riveria said to herself, glad that Loki didn't do something stupid like run around the mansion and announce to everyone that Riveria has a lover now. Just as she was thinking that, Riveria found another note in the letter that said, P.S. Have fun with the book I bought you and put it to good use. Upon reading that, Riveria unwrapped the package that had the previously attached letter. Inside, she found a book, though unlike usual books, this one didn't have a cover or a name anywhere, almost as if it was supposed to be secret or taboo in some way. Riveria has a bad feeling about this. Then he opened the first page of the book where he finally found the title of the book. 101 Ways to Please Your Man. A guide for anyone from virgin to prostitute. Thud. With all her might, Riveria threw the book against a nearby wall, her face red with humiliation and embarrassment. Loki, I swear I'll bring you back for this. Riveria cursed. The next day. Riveria sat alone in the living room early in the morning, reading a book. No, not that book. When Loki walked in, his face broke into a wide grin when he saw Riveria, who was already in the mood to tease the poor elf again. Oh, you're already reading this early in the morning, Mama Riveria. However, that's not the book I gave you, was it? Or did you get so engrossed in it that you read the whole thing last night? Loki said. Riveria was silent for a moment before grabbing her wand that was placed right next to her, responding with, any last words before I send you back to heaven? I'm sorry. Seeing Riveria's cold gaze, Loki immediately fell to his knees and bowed an apology, understanding that he might have taken things too far. Pushing her wand towards Loki, Riveria asked, what do you have to say in your defense? I didn't mean to offend you. I just thought you'd need it eventually. Loki tried to explain, sweating bullets when Riveria's eyes tightened even further after hearing his answer. Quickly, Loki tried to correct himself by adding, I only meant what's best for you. I just want to make sure your lover doesn't leave you because you can't satisfy him. At that, Riveria's eyes widened in surprise, though they soon returned to their dazed state. As if something like that had any importance. And no. No, really. Believe me. Men will leave you if you don't perform well in bed. Believe me. Loki told her. He'd never. Riveria began, however before she could finish she was interrupted by Tiona bursting into the room. Fortunately for Riveria, the Amazonian airhead hadn't heard any of the ongoing conversation. Anyway, she rushed over to tell them, hey you two, did you hear him? Apparently, Argonaut was chased through the pleasure district last night. Some people say he got chased because he didn't pay up after sleeping with a girl. Riveria fell silent after that, simply turning around, grabbing her book and leaving the room. Tiona gave him a puzzled look, while Loki already had a vague idea of what she was thinking at this moment, and that despite not even knowing that Bell was her lover for sure at this moment. Back to Bell's perspective. While Bell had found a place to stay for the time being, he certainly still needed food and money, so he had no choice but to explore the dungeon every day after all. Naturally, he teamed up with Welf and Makoto, as they still liked him and wanted to help him. He also tried to invite Lily, but she was quite dismissive for some reason. Anyway, when they were deep in the dungeon, Makoto had told him about an old friend of hers who might be here in town now. The following night Makoto, Welf and Bell had set out to search for that friend, and well, one thing had led to another, and things finally resulted in the news that had reached Riveria a few hours earlier. Of course, Bell hadn't slept with anyone that night, but he hadn't met Riveria, so he had no way to explain it. Naturally, that kind of news wouldn't please his goddess or Lily either, though Bell himself wouldn't even know. Anyway, things naturally progressed and escalated further, eventually leading to a huge battle between the Ishtar family and the Freya family. The day after the battle. When Riveria heard that news, and especially when she heard that Bell had been involved, she finally began to piece together those events. She was smart enough to understand that Bell wouldn't get involved in such a battle without a good reason, so at least now she was relatively certain that, unlike what she had lamented over the past few days, he hadn't cheated on her. Despite that, she still felt rather strange. She simply couldn't shake this feeling. It bothered her, but even now she felt that Bell might cheat on her one day, unless she became a woman for him. Anyway, once again he had to take care of some chores. He was continuing on his way when he saw Bell sitting on the side of the main road, looking dejected. Of course she approached him, calling out, Bell. Are you okay? It seems something terrible happened. Her concern for her beloved was clear as day. Bell looked up, his eyes puffy and red, almost as if he had cried a lot recently. Riveria? He asked, recognizing her immediately. Bell tried to explain, but couldn't get the words out. Seeing him in this state, Riveria felt she had no choice. She grabbed his arm and dragged him toward a nearby desolate alley, before hugging him tightly. Just as she had done for her before the war game, when she felt so anxious and hurt watching him leave. She did her best to comfort him without saying a word, just offering a shoulder to lean on. Bell hugged him back tightly, once again beginning to cry, sobbing into his shoulder. They stayed like that for a while until Bell began to calm down. Finally, Riveria broke away from him and asked again, "What happened, Bell? What got you so depressed?" "It's my goddess, no, I mean my ex-goddess," Bell explained, the word ex clearly causing him a lot of pain. "What? Don't you mean?" Riveria began, before Bell nodded, confirming her thoughts. "Yeah, hestia, she kicked me out for some reason. She said I cheated on her or something, and that she couldn't take it anymore. She handed me my gear and told me to go find a new family. I wasn't part of hers anymore," Bell explained, his sad voice clearly showing how much this hurt him. While he might not have any romantic feelings for Hestia, or Lily for that matter, since she had also supported Hestia's decision, he clearly saw them as close friends, not even more than that, as family. He never knew that his parents and grandfather also died, and now he had lost his family once again. Riveria was also surprised to hear this. She had assumed Bell and her goddess were inseparable, so she too was completely bewildered by this news. She was silent for a moment. She just didn't know what to say. What should she say? Should she comfort him? Should she tell him to find a better family? Should she try to cheer him up? "So what are you going to do now? Do you have a place to stay?" Riveria finally asked. Bell nodded and said, "Yeah, I'm staying at the abandoned building where you know what I mean." They both blushed slightly when Bell mentioned that night. Anyway, as for what I'll do for now, well, I guess I have no choice but to go find a new family. I can't continue being an adventurer if I don't have a fauna, but my goddess took hers away," Bell explained. Riveria then suggested, "In that case, why don't you come back with me?" "Huh?" Bell asked, clearly stupefied and unable to understand what Riveria was saying. "Don't you want to join my family? Well, I guess you got off to a bit of a rough start with all those girls chasing you around the woods, and Bet wasn't exactly nice to you either, but I promise you they're not that bad once you get to know them." Riveria tried to defend her family. What? Me joining the Loki familia?" Bell yelled. "Aw, come on. I promise it won't be that bad." Riveria told him, a little hurt that he rejected her idea so stubbornly. "And no, that's not what I'm trying to say here. You guys are one of the strongest families in the city. A rookie like me could never join you. I was looking for a family for the first time," Bell finally said, clearing up this misunderstanding. Riveria could only laugh at that, glad that he didn't actually want to reject the idea, but simply felt unworthy. "Don't worry about it. I mean, aren't you the record holder who surpassed even Ace Wallenstein? And the one who defeated a Minotaur at level 1 alone? The one who defeated the irregular floor boss on the 18th floor? The one who beat a well-known adventurer in a wargame, despite being a level lower than him? Just list your feats. I doubt anyone would disagree with you that you're worthy of joining. Besides, even if it was N''T someone they would disagree with." Riveria gave a faint wink there, "Having one of the familia leaders on your side, you hardly have to worry about them." "Well, I guess you're right, B, but I still need new armor and a new weapon. I'll have to work for that before I can join you," Bell argued again. "Don't worry about that, we have plenty of spare weapons and armor for the lesser members of our family. It might not be ideal since you deserve better, but I'm sure with your skill you'll be able to improve from that easily," Riveria replied, finally relieving Bell of that last worry as well. "Well, if you guys really want me to join, then I certainly won't object," Bell said timidly. They both went to Twilight Manor after that. There was a bit of a commotion when the guards saw Riveria returning with Bell in tow, though Riveria was quick to calm them down. When asked why she was here, Riveria simply told them, "I have something to discuss with him and Loki. Don't worry, you'll probably know what it was about soon." After that, the two went to meet Loki, who was lounging in the living room. Riveria practically dragged her away from her newly opened bottle of liquor, telling her to stop drinking for a moment and be a respectable goddess for once since they had a guest and all. Bell could only watch awkwardly, clearly unsure of what to do or say in such a situation. Eventually, Loki managed to drag Loki into her room and close the door behind her and Bell. "What's up now, Mama Riveria? What could be so important that I can't even enjoy my alcohol first?" Loki complained. Seeing her like this, Riveria was glad she'd caught her while she was still sober, otherwise she probably would have sunk to the ground in embarrassment at having a drunk for a goddess. Riveria nodded to Bell, her hands clasped in front of her, saying, "I've brought you a new member." Loki could only react to that news with, "Huh? Why would she want to join us? Or not, other than that, I don't want to get involved with that shrimp of a goddess, so definitely not." Loki immediately rejected him. Before Riveria hit her on the head. "Listen to her circumstances first, drunk," he said with annoyance in his voice, before pulling out a chair and sitting down, now giving Bell the chance to speak. After Bell told him his story and Riveria said that she had invited him after hearing about it and that he was definitely worthy of doing so given his accomplishment so far, Loki shrugged and said, "True, if that's so. I guess I can't argue. If you're really sure about joining, why don't you take off your shirt so I can give you my fauna?" "Oh, I hope you don't mind Riveria's staying. You probably wouldn't know since that shrimp probably never did that, but it's common for someone else to be part of that process. You know, making sure accidents don't happen and things," Loki said. Naturally, Bell had never heard of this, so he looked to Riveria to see what she had to say about it. Of course, something like this wasn't common and was more likely a strange prank by Loki, however, Riveria didn't mind being here either, so she simply nodded, confirming Loki's statement. "Yes, it's quite common," Riveria told him. After receiving her confirmation, Bell took off his shirt and turned his back to Loki so he could get to work. Riveria, on the other hand, wanted to turn around to give Bell some privacy, however. "Oh Riveria, would you mind taking off your clothes too? I haven't updated your status in a while either, and since we need someone here to do that, it's best if we do it now," Loki told her with a smile that Bell couldn't see. Riveria blushed, saying, "Do you have no consideration for the feelings of a woman you perverted?" "Oh, now don't be like that, you can sit on the opposite side and he won't see anything. I can even do both of your states at the same time," Loki told him. "Well, I guess that's okay then, but I swear, if you do anything weird," Riveria said, acting as reticent as possible, getting on the opposite side of Loki, where Bell couldn't see her before stripping off her clothes and offering Loki her back as well. Of course, that was all just an act, after all, Bell had seen Riveria naked more than once before. Thanks to his divine powers, Loki immediately realized that Riveria was hiding something. He knew Riveria had other ulterior motives for offering Bell to join the family, and the fact that Riveria would agree to such a ridiculous idea as stripping naked in the same room as a man only further increased Loki's suspicions. At this point, he was pretty sure he could guess who Riveria's secret lover was. And after updating Riveria's status and giving Bell his new one, I could be 100% sure. Hahaha. Loki could only laugh, almost rolling on the floor with joy. Of course, both Riveria and Bell were surprised by this sudden change in behavior. "What is it this time, you useless goddess?" Riveria asked in her usual annoyed tone. However, this time, Loki's happiness wasn't dampened in the slightest by Riveria's comment. Instead, he took 2 pieces of paper, wrote Riveria and Bell's status on one of them, and handed it to the two, with the words, "And here I thought you two were a cute shy couple." Both Bell and Riveria were surprised when they were suddenly called a couple, giving Loki enough time to leave the room, laughing the whole time. Only then did Riveria and Bell look at their respective sheets, as well as the other person's sheets. Riveria level 6. Skills. Fairy Hymn. Alf Regina. Lover's Growth. Ageless. Lover's Growth. Shared experiences with your partner will greatly increase your Excelia gain. Hexwell activity between you will transfer the bonus generated by this skill to your lover, effectively doubling it. Ageless. Hexwell activity slows aging. The owner of the skill will always remain as steadfast as a virgin. Bell level 3. Skills. Priest Lyris. Argonaut. Lover's Growth. Rabbit Breeding. Lover's Growth. Shared experiences with your partner will greatly increase your Excelia gain. Hexwell activity between you will transfer the bonus generated by this skill to your lover, effectively doubling it. Rabbit Breeding. Greater endurance, speed and strength during Hex. The owner of the skill can control his or her own fertility. Chapter 5. What? They both exclaimed as they read their statuses. However, from them, their reactions started to differ. On one side was Bell, his fist tightly clenching the piece of paper, now beginning to realize why his goddess might have kicked him out, though even more than that he was baffled that the night with Riveria had gained him a total of 3 skills. After all, he only had Argonaut before that, but now he had 4 skills in total, 2 of which could increase the speed at which he grew. Considering his already abnormal growth, there was no telling what would happen with not 1 but 2 skills to increase that even further. Author's note. I felt like including this since Bell had never heard of Lyris Friest before that and would now naturally think that this skill must have appeared after the night with Riveria. Riveria, on the other hand, was silent, her face flushed red all the way to the tips of her pointy ears, her entire body feeling hot from the embarrassment of having such embarrassing abilities carved into her back. However, her own abilities weren't the only thing on her mind, she was also impressed with Bell's abilities. Now, of course, she had never seen his abilities before, unlike her status, however, unlike Bell, she could tell that at least one of his growth abilities, presumably Lyris Friest, must have been there even before he met her, allowing him to make such advancements in such a short amount of time. It actually made her a little jealous, thinking about how he had a different woman in his life besides her that he felt so much love for. Aside from that, she was obviously impressed by his Argonaut skill, which was a skill many adventurers would kill for. Truly a skill worthy of a hero. Loki's perspective. While the two lovebirds were still surprised by his new abilities, Loki had already returned to his wine bottle, although unlike before, he now had a much darker expression, completely opposite to what it had been like when he left Bell and Riveria behind. How Loki let out a sigh before taking a sip from his bottle. Really, I'm happy you finally found someone for yourself, Riveria, but you really had to choose the one person who would give me the biggest headache, huh? A certain white-haired beauty goddess flashed through her mind, someone she had promised not to interfere with when it came to Bell, someone who had been ruthless enough to burn down an entire city district simply because the person in charge of that district had rung her bell. Sorry woman, but my children come here first, so I'm not going to hand him over anytime soon. I suggest you get over it quickly, Loki muttered, taking another large gulp of his drink, almost as if to drown his worries. Meanwhile on top of Babel. My lady? Otter asked. She got no response. Freya was sitting in her usual seat, though unlike normal, she wasn't enjoying watching the children play on the floor. Now she was watching her new favorite mortal struggling and growing there. No, today she was clenching her fists, visibly shaking with anger. Just now she had seen Bell enter Twilight Manor, the home of the Loki family, from the top of her tower. My Lady Otter tried once more, seemingly able to get Freya's attention this time. Freya seemed to calm down at Otter's voice, if only a little. She took a deep breath and stopped trembling. Otter was relieved to see that. He had never seen Freya so angry before. Perhaps they could still avoid conflict over this matter. Otter, Freya said, interrupting the warrior's trail of thoughts. Yes, my lady. He replied, ready to accept her orders. Get everyone ready, we're going to war, Freya proclaimed. Even Otter couldn't keep up appearances. His eyes widened in shock upon hearing such a statement. Now she knew that the human Bell was important to her, but a war between Freya and the Loki family would not only be a much tougher war than fighting Ishtar, the city as a whole would most likely collapse. Unlike Ishtar, the guild would intervene immediately, and since they were the aggressors and had only recently wreaked havoc on an entire district, there was no way they could get away with it with only a small fine to pay. Unless they planned to make enemies of Riveria as a whole, they couldn't possibly take on the guild, not to mention being outnumbered. Of course, numbers didn't matter much anymore due to the fauna, but that didn't mean they could take on an entire city, and that wasn't even considering the fact that the enemy would consist of multiple level 6 and level 5 adventurers as well. No matter how much he worshipped his goddess, Otter simply couldn't allow this. He wouldn't allow her and the rest of the family to become criminals, simply because of a selfish desire. My lady, he began, trying to choose his words carefully. Otter. Freya turned to him, obviously surprised that he didn't immediately confirm her orders, preparing to carry them out. It was unusual, perhaps even a first for him. I would suggest that you not interfere at this point, he told her, Freya's face quickly showing her dissatisfaction with such a statement. By now you should know how much some of our members dislike that boy, so I think he'll be able to grow a lot more and shine even brighter if he stays in the Loki family for a while, Otter continued nonetheless. I'm certain no living creature can resist your beauty. You can force him to join you at any time, and Loki promised not to interfere, so I doubt he'll betray you. Besides, in a way, you should thank him after all, his family will help him grow and keep him out of the hands of some uncooperative god or goddess. Otter noted the benefits of Bell staying with Loki. You can make him come anytime, you just have to ask after all, so I beg you, hold your temper and just wait for the right moment, he finished his plea to his goddess. Freya still seemed a little dissatisfied, but I suppose you're right. Maybe I lost my cool a bit there. She agreed, effectively reversing her orders. Otter breathed an internal sigh of relief, having averted a crisis this time. I will offer my time for now, however, I truly hope Loki keeps his promise, otherwise I will not forgive her, Freya murmured. 1 month later. The Loki familia had been in quite the uproar when their newest member was announced. Some of them had been delighted, like Tiona or Ace, though Ace obviously wasn't as enthusiastic as Tiona was. Some of them had been happy about it, like Finn and Gareth, both happy to have another promising young man in their family. Some of them had been quite dismissive, like Bet, who had run her mouth as usual, though she didn't voice any objections, after all. Bell has proven his potential more than enough. Some had simply not cared, like Tyan, who, as usual, had only had eyes for Finn, and finally there were some who had been jealous of him and his achievements, especially the adventurers with lower ranks as well as Lefiya. Now, a month after that, the situation had calmed down considerably. Bell simply wasn't a bad guy, and he didn't look down on others, not even the opposite. He often belittled their hard work and was their own worst critic, which naturally led to him quickly becoming quite popular in the family, especially among the lower family members who had been jealous of him before. They now realized that it wasn't just luck that had gotten him to where he was now, but pure dedication and iron will. He now spent most of his days like this. After awakening, he would train with Ace, as she had taken it upon herself to continue his training with him, now that they were in the same family. Tiona would also occasionally join in, though she was usually still asleep when these two did, meaning that if she did join in, it was only later in the day. At first, the other family members had been jealous of this as well, but as soon as they saw how badly he was beaten by both of them, the jealousy soon turned to pity, which then turned to admiration, as they saw how he stood up and continued to fight tirelessly and with spirit, despite the overwhelming difference in power. After training, he usually went out with some of the lower-ranking members of the family, level 3 and 4, like Raul, and took on the quests issued by the guild. Of course, they weren't spectacular adventures, as Raul seemed to know by this point which quests would bring them the most benefit with the least amount of trouble, something Bell was very happy about, since A's and Tiona's training had taken a great toll on his body. Whenever he came home, he was exhausted and completely burned out. Incidentally, he also shared a room with Raul, so Raul knew better than anyone how difficult all of this was for Bell. Perhaps that's also part of why he would choose easier missions, instead of trying to push both himself and Bell beyond their limits. Now, of course, regardless of his exhaustion, Bell truly wished to visit Riveria and talk to her a lot, now that she was part of his family and he saw her daily, but that was difficult to say the least. For one thing, he would never traverse the entire house at night, go to her room, and return without anyone noticing, something they were both still trying to avoid. Of course, he could now talk openly with her during the day, but even trying to keep their relationship a secret, they could hardly have a real home to talk to or flirt with each other in public like that. That, of course, didn't even consider Riveria's own work schedule. After all, it wasn't as if she didn't do anything all day. However, there had been a few days when they had both been free. Even then they didn't exactly have time, or rather, even though they had time, they didn't have a place to meet. Meeting inside the house was out of the question, and so was finding a restaurant. However, they couldn't even meet at the abandoned building they had previously used. That was due to the destruction of the pleasure quarter, as it had caused an overwhelming increase in demand for housing, as many prostitutes had not only worked but also lived in that district. Now that it had burned down, many of them had moved into previously abandoned buildings all over the city. That pretty much left them with only one option to meet up, that option being the dungeon. However, even that option had its problems. For one, they couldn't go to the deep levels where there were fewer people with just the two of them, meaning they would have to stay on the upper floors or at least the middle ones. While they would both manage to make it to the 18th floor by now, it still wasn't a good idea for Bell, still only a level 3 to go there alone, given that he wasn't as experienced as other adventurers, so that wasn't an option, just leave the floors above the 18th. However, that also meant that they would run into many more adventurers than they would have to hide from. After all, if someone spotted them, it would surely turn into some strange rumors, even if someone, say from the Loki familia. Their best bet was the 12th floor with its abnormally thick fog. However, while that made it easier to hide, it still didn't conceal them perfectly. And all of that didn't even take into account the atmosphere. After all, it would be difficult for any romantic mood to flourish within the dungeon. However, having said all that, they were both slowly but surely starving each other to death. If nothing happened, they would eventually end up meeting in the dungeon anyway, or risking Bell sneaking into Riveria's room at night. Fortunately, however, they did not have to resort to such measures. "A mission from Milan?" Riveria asked. "Yeah, apparently there's a sea monster that's worrying them, and they can't deal with it on their own, so they approached the guild," Loki replied. Just this morning, a mission from Milan had arrived at the guild, requesting immediate help in eliminating a sea monster that had already claimed multiple victims. "And why should we handle it? There should be other families who can handle this, right?" Gareth asked, unsure why they of all people should be tasked with it. After all, it wasn't like Freya or maybe the Ganesha family wouldn't be able to handle this. A normal sea monster, even if it could upset the people of Milan, shouldn't be too difficult for these families to deal with. However, Loki's expression seemed to betray those thoughts as he began to explain. Apparently, that thing has wrecked several ships now, and there hasn't been a single survivor in any of these incidents. Furthermore, Loki continued, this has been going on for over a week now, and the people of Milan are obviously becoming distressed. People can't go out fishing anymore and are rapidly losing money and food. That's why the guild wants this to be dealt with as soon as possible. That's why they want to send a strong family, as the situation can't last much longer. Of course I wanted to leave that job to Freya, but she seemed to be in a very bad mood and we ended up having to deal with this." Finally, Loki sighed and added, "But sadly, the guild is still so stubborn when it comes to high-class adventurers leaving the city, which is why only a small group of us will be going. I've decided to send 4 people in total. That might be a pretty small group, but I think you can handle it, Loki told the three elite families. Din also let out a small sigh and expressed his opinion. Well, it's not like we can delay this any longer. So, who are you planning to send? Loki then told them, first, I decided to send Tiona and Tyan. They both have the ability to dive and experience when it comes to sea monsters, which means they are ideal for this job. I also want Riveria to join them, Loki continued, turning his head to Riveria in the process. You know the god of that city, Njord, so I think it would be good for you to work on this as well. Besides, I can't leave Tiona and Tyan alone to deal with this. While Tyan might be quite reliable on a day-to-day basis, these two still need a calm leader in battle. Finally, Loki said, and the last member I chose is Bell Cranel. It would be troublesome to send even more first-class adventurers. Besides, I think their skills might be useful here. Of course, it was a matter of debate whether her abilities would be useful, meaning her abilities connected to Riveria, which would mean that Loki was planning to help them and give them some time for themselves, or perhaps her Argonaut ability which could be useful in this quest for truth. Riveria decided to believe that Loki was talking about Argonaut, otherwise he would have had another reason to beat up that naughty goddess. Finn closed his eyes and thought about the lineup for a bit before saying, yeah, I guess these four will do though for some reason. His thumb was hurting, which always indicated something bad was about to happen nonetheless. He believed that each member of this small team could handle any unforeseen events. Bell Cranel in particular seemed to be used to this sort of thing. Small time skip. With all that settled, the individual members of the search party were briefed by Loki. Everyone packed some things as they didn't know how long they would be staying in Milan and finally set off through the city gate. I can't believe we get to go to Milan again. Tiona exclaimed as they walked down the path toward Milan, clearly excited by the quest. Were you in Milan before, Tiona? Bella asked, obviously curious. Yeah, Tyan and I got there first before we came to Arario. You were there for a while too, weren't you, Riveria? Tiona replied, asking Riveria immediately after. However, Riveria didn't reply. She walked behind the three, engrossed in reading a book. It was a truly strange book for some reason, it didn't have a title written on it, and for some reason, Riveria kept looking at Belle while reading, seemingly with a slight blush on her face. Riveria. Tiona exclaimed, as always oblivious to the fact that Riveria had been focused on reading and was now bothering her. Huh? Oh yeah, I was in Milan before too. Riveria replied, trying to hide the fact that she hadn't been paying attention behind a cough. Belle smiled at her wryly, she was very cute when she was nervous. After the attention shifted away from Riveria, she once again buried her nose in the book. It was a book she had read more than once in the past month, even though she would never be able to do so without blushing. In fact, she had sworn to herself never to read this book at any point in her life, but she was jealous, all right. From the moment she read about Belle's ability, Lyris Freeze, she had been jealous. At first, she had tried to deny it, but the more she denied it, the more she heard Loki's words echoing in her mind. Trust me. Men will leave you if you don't perform well in bed. Normally, that wouldn't have bothered her, but combining that with the fact that she rarely got to speak to Belle, let alone have physical contact with him, finally drove her to jump in, and despite her pride and embarrassment, this meant she'd sworn to herself that she'd show him her progress once she had the chance, and well, this quest seemed like a good opportunity. That's why she was reading this book outside now, instead of at night in her room, like she'd been doing for the past month. Either way, they continued towards Milan without incident, Tiona chatting happily with Belle, while annoying Tyan with her constant laughter like any other day. Another small jump. Wow, is this the ocean? It's so big. Belle expressed his surprise when he saw that large body of water for the first time. Unlike the other three, this was his first time, and he was quite excited. Tiona also joined in and said, right. That's what I said when I first saw the ocean as I left home. Tyan couldn't help but add, yeah, that meathead couldn't help but jump in and swim. Tiona, not realizing that Tyan's comment had been negative, suggested, yeah, now that you mention it, I really could go for a swim right now. At that, Riveria quickly said, sorry, Tiona, but we're not here to play. You can go swimming soon enough once we know more about that monster. Let's go through the city and meet up with Njord. Even Tiona had to agree that it might have gotten a little heated there, after all, they had a mission to take care of first. As they walked through the harbor, Belle couldn't help but ask, does it always look like this here? No, that's not the case. It seems the village really was hit hard by the monster attacks. Riveria replied. All around them were boats chained to the pier. The port seemed to be bursting at the seams at this moment. Not a single ship was visible at sea. The only ships currently sailing seemed to be those of the guild staff patrolling along the coast, far, far away from waters deep enough for a sea monster to lurk. The distinctive smell of fresh fish was also missing, as was the hustle and bustle of tourists and merchants boarding or loading their boats. Overall, the atmosphere seemed tense and dark, nothing like the welcoming water gateway to the labyrinth city of Riveria that Milan used to be. There were a few groups of fishermen sitting and standing on street corners, seemingly drinking away their worries, evident from the many empty bottles they had lying around. Overall, it was a pretty terrible sight for the once brilliant fishing town. Finally the group arrived at the house of Njord, the god of this village and an old friend of Riveria. They entered his house, only to find him also very tense and worried. However, he gave them a bright smile and greeted them, trying to hide his dark mood behind a smile. "Hello Riveria. And others, I guess haha. Nice to meet you, I'm Njord, the god who somehow runs this small fishing village." "Hello Njord. It seems you're not doing too well, is it because of the monster?" Riveria asked him, clearly concerned about his current state, after all he was a close and trusted friend. Njord let out a sigh. "Well, I guess there's no hiding it, huh? Sorry, the last few days have been quite busy and tiring, and many people keep coming to me, complaining that they're losing more and more income every day." However, after cheering up a bit, he gave them a smile and said, "But is that ending true? I suppose you were the group they sent to help us." "Yeah, we'll take that thing down easily. It wouldn't be our first sea monster," Tiona said briskly, clearly motivated to finish it off quickly now that she'd seen what that monster had wreaked on this town. After all, if she hated anything more than thinking, it was seeing the people around her feeling depressed and hopeless. Even Njord had to chuckle at their enthusiasm. "Looks like I have nothing to worry about, huh?" he told the group. Riveria, the group's composed leader, then tried to move the conversation forward by saying, "As much as I hate to say this, I doubt we'll be able to completely end it without your help. At least we'll do that. I need you to lend us a boat and we might need some brave fishermen to join our fight. After all, none of us know how to properly navigate a boat." "Don't worry about that. I expected as much, those things were already taken care of. Your crew and your ship are ready to sail whenever you are," Njord told them, showing that he had expected as much. "I'm glad you can handle those things so easily, it really proves you're worthy of managing the city. You seem to be much more trustworthy than a certain mischievous goddess," Riveria told him. Now, don't speak ill of a goddess while she's not around," Njord told him with a smile. "Well, since everything is prepared, I guess we'll head out to kill this monster as soon as possible. However, before that, I'd like you to say anything that could be connected in any way to this monster. After all, it's always better to be prepared," Riveria said. At that, the three remaining members also turned their full attention to Njord, after all, anything he could tell them could be crucial information. Njord brought his hand to his chin, seemingly lost in thought for a moment before beginning. "Well, first of all there's its eyes. Of course we don't know its actual size, after all, no one who saw it ever came back alive, but judging by the debris that washed ashore, it's supposedly several dozen meters long. Chances are the thing has a snake-like body that wraps around ships to crush them, rather than bite them. From that we can estimate that the head must be quite small, or at least not much bigger than the rest of its body. Why hasn't anyone seen it yet? You can't even seem to get too far from the shore, but if that thing is really that big and that close, wouldn't someone on the shore have seen it by now?" Bell chimed in. "That's the thing. Whenever that beast attacks, there seems to be a storm. It comes suddenly and completely unpredictably, and as soon as the monster leaves, the storms loosen as well. However, while the monster is out there, the rain becomes so thick that you can barely see along the coast, making it completely impossible to catch a glimpse of that thing. It's almost as if that beast is controlling the weather." Njord answered him with a grim expression. "I see. Anything else you can tell us? Anything might help," Riveria finally asked. I doubt it has any meaning, but ever since that thing appeared, all the fish around the area have been gone. It's not just the fish though, even other sea monsters, the smaller monsters we've all grown accustomed to by now, seem to be completely gone too," Njord told them. "Almost as if they were afraid of that thing," Bell muttered, more to himself than anyone in particular. There was something that kept bothering him. Somehow, this all seemed familiar, but Bell just couldn't figure out what this reminded him of. "Thank you for your help on this, Njord. Tell your men we'll be leaving immediately. I promise we'll take that thing down and restore peace to the city," Riveria finally said, a reassuring determination in her voice. "No, thank you," was all Njord had to say before he stood up to summon his men. About half an hour later, their ship had set sail and they were floating out of the harbor, the sun still high in the sky on this bright cloudless day. Of course, everyone seemed wary of the waves around them, the crew being especially tense as they steered the ship out to sea. Tiona and Tyan had positioned themselves on the left and right sides of the ship respectively to defend against attacks from the side, while Bell and Riveria were stationed at the front. It was decided that they would share a position since Riveria wasn't a physical fighter and would have trouble defending against a monster's attacks with just her staff, so Bell was ordered to protect her until she could finish casting. "What do you think of this, Bell?" You seem worried, Riveria asked him as they looked into the distance side by side. It's nothing, just somehow all the things Njord told us, they seem to remind me of something. I have a feeling it's something important, but I can't get my hands on it, Bell answered truthfully. Well, this phenomenon sounds pretty special, so I doubt it's something that's happened before. Are you sure it's not just a bad feeling? Riveria expressed her opinion. No, Bell said, not knowing how to express what he wanted to say. Either way, they didn't have much more time to discuss this matter, as dark clouds began to obscure the sun. The clouds had appeared suddenly and in no particular direction, almost as if they had formed around them rather than naturally. As the clouds darkened the sky and diminished the light around them, the sea also began to darken, slowly turning pitch black instead of its former bright blue. And then the rain came. It almost seemed impossible. So much rain began to fall from the pitch black sky that the view of the shore disappeared in a matter of seconds. The winds around them also increased, causing the waves to rise higher and higher, the now frightened fishermen working hard around them to keep the boat under control. The one kept at the rear of the ship in particular was doing his best. He kept turning the ship's steering wheel and shouting orders to the other crew members. He was so focused on his task, as were the crew members and adventurers in their respective endeavors, that he didn't notice a massive head rising from the water behind him. Only when the head fell on him, swallowing him whole, did he manage to let out a cry before leaving this world without a trace. Every head on the ship immediately turned towards his scream, however, all they saw was the giant creature's head diving once more underwater. Hey! Stay here, you damn thing. Tiona shouted before jumping into the water to follow the beast. Idiot. Tyan cursed before following her sister, not wanting to leave her alone in the water with that monster. Almost as if the beast had anticipated this turn of events, its head shot out of the water as soon as Tiona and Tyan jumped out of the boat on the complete opposite side of the twins. It then began wrapping itself around the ship, crushing several fishermen as well as the mainsail in the process. It was obviously looking to continue that process, however, before it had the chance to do so, Tiona and Tyan stopped it on its fourth loop around the ship. They were both visibly angered at being outsmarted by the monster like that, causing them to attack it furiously. However, they barely scraped things on a large scale. Meanwhile, now stopped in its tracks, the monster began to contract around the ship, causing the wood in its grip to creak and split. The ship would barely last a minute under this pressure. At the same time, he was even fighting the twin under what was nothing more than his head. The fishermen, in an attempt to protect their boat from sinking, rushed toward the creature's snake-like body and began beating it with their fists, some of them with knives as well, but it was no use. Its bones crunched and several knives even broke, but they couldn't make even a dent in the scales all over the monster's body. Little by little, they began to succumb to despair when, harbinger of the end, the white snow Riveria began to weave her magic song. Hearing his calm, serene, clear, and sharp voice in battle helped the crew stay calm. Low with the wind before the twilight, Riveria's trusty voice continued, her spell already approaching the final verses of her spell. However, the elf singing voice wasn't something the creature seemed to ignore. It temporarily abandoned its fight with the Amazon twins, raised its head above the water, and charged straight at Riveria to swallow her. No, you won't. Bell exclaimed, slamming the creature's head down with the sword he had brought with him. Now, normally, a level 3 adventurer like himself wouldn't be able to harm this beast, given that it had barely been scratched by not one, but 2 level 6 adventurers, however, he seemed to be getting lucky. Since the beast was too focused on Riveria and her voice, Bell managed to escape its natural defenses and was able to thrust his sword straight into one of the thing's eyes. A painful roar echoed across the ocean as the monster threw its head back in agony, thrashing wildly as it tried to pull the sword from its eye. That fun gave Riveria enough time to finish her spell. Closing light, the frozen land. Blizzard, the 3 severe winters, my name is Alf, he sang, and finally, he unleashed his magic. Wind from Bulvator. Immediately, a cold torrent of ice and snow shot out of his staff, capable of freezing anything and everything. Riveria, however, didn't aim for the monster. No, instead, she had decided to use her magic to create a large ice platform right next to the ship. Honestly, it was doubtful that his spell could have harmed such a creature with the little attention he had invested in it, but even if it had been able to harm it, it would have meant sacrificing many of the fishermen, as they would be caught in the blast. That's why he'd instead chosen to make a platform for everyone to escape to as well, where they could continue their fight. Of course, he'd made sure to do it on the opposite side of the twins, so they wouldn't get trapped in the ice. While Riveria had made sure not to harm the fishermen, she had also managed to cause some damage to the beast after all, her spell had an incredibly wide range. While it certainly wasn't enough to do more than simply freeze the scales of things, it was still remarkable that she had put so much thought into executing this single spell. It truly showed how capable of a leader and mage she truly was. Quick. Over there while the thing is still distracted. Riveria gave orders, the fisherman and Bell followed her order. As soon as the last fisherman set foot on the newly created platform, the beast finally crushed the boat completely in its hands and once again dived into the depths of the ocean to prepare for its next attack. Meanwhile, the two twins had returned from the water and joined the rest of the group on the platform. Apparently, they had even been severely injured, despite the short time they had actually thought about the beast, evident from their respective abilities that had already been activated. What is that thing? My knives aren't even scraping it. Tiona, now wielding a pair of twin blades, instead of her erga, as it was too slow and heavy to use underwater, asked angrily. Leviathan, Bell said. When that name was mentioned, everyone who heard it suddenly fell silent. What? Tyne asked, doubting her words. I'm sure. That thing, it has to be Leviathan. Bell said confidently. But Leviathan died a long time ago. He was killed by the Hera family over 10 years ago. Riveria exclaimed. I know. It doesn't make sense. But it all fits. Ruling over the weather, scaring all the fish and other monsters, it just seems to be a lot smaller than the Leviathan mentioned in all the stories. Maybe this thing is still a child. Bell suggested. Either way it would be a problem, Riveria said. However, before they could discuss this matter further, the beast, presumably the baby Leviathan, began attacking again. Within seconds, it broke through the large ice shelf, taking a group of sailors with it. Only now did the group finally get a clear look at its ugly head. On top of its snake-like body sat a head not unlike a snake's, however, it had large fins on either side of its head and also sported two disturbingly large teeth on either side of its mouth, not unlike those of a saber-toothed cat, joined by many smaller, but no less sharp, teeth on the inside of its mouth. One remaining eye seemed to watch the group, Bell in particular, as it dragged its victims into the water. We're all going to die. One of the fishermen exclaimed, finally losing all the courage he had felt before. Tiona, Tyne, and Riveria hadn't fallen too far into despair yet, they weren't exactly optimistic at this point either. The thing is, none of them were able to fully penetrate the baby Leviathan's scales. Even Riveria could only do so by sacrificing her entire mind in the process, and even then there was a good chance she'd survive its spell. Only now, when times were darkest and hope was almost forgotten, do the heroes emerge. As everyone struggled with despair, they found themselves listening for a bell. At first, it was a rather small bell, a small chime at best, calming their nerves and soothing their souls. However, the longer they waited, the louder it grew. Very soon, it had grown from a small chime to a large church bell that could be so loud that even the people on the coast of Milan could hear it. And that sound originated with Bell. While everyone else had begun to drown in despair, Bell had decided to stand up and fight. He decided to become the hero they needed, no matter what. Tiona, Tyne. I need you to protect me, please. Bell asked them. Even though he was a level 3, a supporter in this level 6 group at best, they didn't question him. Instead, they raised their weapons with a smile, preparing to face the beast in combat once more. And of course, they didn't have to wait long. Soon enough, the Leviathan emerged from the sea again, its remaining eye firmly on Bell, almost as if it knew this boy was the biggest threat to it right now. However, he rushed forward trying to kill him. Oh, no, don't, you damn snake. Tiona exclaimed. She had abandoned her weapons at this point, aware that she would hardly scratch the beast. Instead, she simply used brute force to strike at the side of its head and divert its course. The Leviathan was furious, but it was no fool. It knew Tiona was just stalling for time. Instead of focusing on her, it simply repeated its attack on Bell, however, this time it was also deflected, this time by a kick from Tiona's counterpart, Tyne. Riveria also wanted to prepare a spell to protect Bell. However, she planned to create a barrier around him. Don't do it, Riveria. Let me defend myself with these two. Bell told her as he began to glow now, his Argonaut ability gaining in power. But Riveria began. I don't know if my power will be enough. Help me. Start singing. Bell ordered. Now, of course, his ability was used to create enough power to kill anyone who was his enemy, however. That still didn't mean it would be strong enough to put a level 3 adventurer on equal footing with a legendary beast of myth. After all, even abilities had their limits. That was why he decided to take a gamble. He would bet on Riveria's strength, not his own, after all, he could trust his lover with all his soul. And Riveria would trust him with everything she had. She abandoned all thoughts of protecting him and instead began to weave another spell. They both prepared for the final confrontation, the Leviathan growing more furious with each attack the badly wounded twins blocked. And finally, everything was ready. Bell had fully charged his ability, and Riveria was ready to unleash her most powerful magic. Bell then grabbed Riveria's staff. He'd finally have to see if his gamble had worked out or not. Let's not do this. Together he said as his wide aura slowly began to flow towards Riveria as well. Now not only him, but Riveria as well was enveloped by Argonaut. Yes. Together. Riveria said, pointing her staff at the Leviathan. Firebolt. Ray Levitain. As they both cast their spell, their magic blasted even further toward the beast in the water. The twins had already abandoned their post, moving away from the impact zone. Of course, the Leviathan also tried to dive back into the water, however, it couldn't do so in time. As Riveria and Bell's magic traveled, it began to combine. Their spells collided, merged, erupted again, only to fuse once more. Their magic created a phenomenon that had never been witnessed before. By fusing their respective powers, they created a new spell, one that was unrivaled in speed and destructive power. Then it struck. His attack slammed into the Leviathan's main body, causing a gigantic shockwave, sending everyone, including Bell and Riveria, tumbling to the ground. The heat from his new spell was so intense that parts of the ocean itself began to evaporate. And in the middle of it all was a pain-filled roar from a beast, a dying beast. No matter how tough these scales were, they weren't enough to protect against this kind of heat. The beast seemed to be roasted from the inside out, its magic stone liquefying inside its chest. And finally there was silence. The beast had died long ago, its body turned to ash, leaving only one of its teeth as a loose object. And then, the cheers of victory began. The fishermen hugged each other and fell to their knees in prayer, savoring their lives. They had never been so happy to be alive. Tiona and Tyan also joined in the celebration. Now that's what I call an Argonaut hero. Tiona exclaimed, and Tyan added, you really are a special kind of hero. Bell and Riveria, however, were lying face down on the ground, both unconscious now that they had given this entire attack, one of them due to low mentality, the other due to having exhausted every ounce of stamina in their body. Several hours later. Bell opened his eyes, still feeling completely exhausted and spent. Where am I? He muttered as he turned around. Apparently, he was lying in a warm, comfortable bed. Besides him, he could hear Tiona snorting and see a sleeping Tyan. What Bell didn't know was that, after their intense battle, they had been rescued from the ice shelf by a boat sent from the shore after the storm had cleared. Jord had then taken care of Tiona, Tyan, Riveria and Bell, or well, he had to take care of them would be more accurate as he was certainly not a healer. Tiona and Tyan were still conscious at the time, however, once things calmed down, they too quickly fell asleep. Seeing them like this, Jord decided to transport them away from the city and along the coast to a small beach cottage where they could sleep and relax undisturbed. Of course Bell didn't know any of that, however, he could tell that Tiona and Tyan had been treated, so he didn't really care. Then he turned over in his bed once more. On the other side of his bed, he could see a tooth lying around the object from the Leviathan. So we really beat him, Bell muttered. Only now that he looked away from the long, sharp teeth beside him, did he see an empty bed beside him. Of course, that bed belonged to Riveria. She'd woken up before him after all, she had an ability that helped her regain her mind which meant she'd gotten up much faster than him. Riveria, Bell muttered, looking around the room, however there was no response. Bell now decided to get out of bed and find his elf lover. Sure, he was exhausted, but there were more important things than that. He found an open door leading outside. He checked it only to find Riveria. Skinny dipping in the dark calm ocean under a full moon, once again enchanting him as it had on the 18th floor. Riveria had decided to bathe to relieve her own tiredness and allow her body to relax, and since she hadn't brought a swimsuit, she decided to bathe naked. Wow, he whispered, captivated by her beauty. Hearing her voice, she quickly turned around and looked at him. As they looked into each other's eyes, they both blushed, however, unlike their first meeting, neither of them shied away. This actually takes me back to our meeting on the 18th floor, Bell said, awkwardly rubbing his head with one hand. Riveria replied timidly, you know if you wanted to see me bathe you just had to ask. They both chuckled at that comment. Finally, Riveria extended a hand to Bell, saying, do you perhaps wish to join me? I wouldn't love anything more right now, Bell told her, his tiredness almost disappearing as he stripped off his clothes and walked into the water toward her. The water was surprisingly warm, perhaps due to the large amount of heat her spell had poured into the sea earlier, however, it may have been her imagination. Lemon skipped. Either way, knowing that they couldn't stay much longer if they didn't want Tiona and Tyan to find them here, they quickly got out of the water, or rather, Bell got out of the water, taking Riveria with him. Only now, finally coming out of her state of pure arousal that Riveria had caused, did she finally realize how hard he had really taken her. Riveria, are you okay? Did I go too far? He worried as he hurried to dress her in the clothes he had left on the beach before dressing himself. Once again, he dropped Riveria, splashing a little water on her face to properly wake her mind from its pleasure-filled daze. At least that was working. What's going on? What? How is it already morning? Riveria asked, her mind still in confusion. However, he was now able to stand on his own legs again, even though they were really shaky. I think I overdid it a little last night. Sorry, Bell apologized. It's fine, Riveria told him, unable to look at him properly as he mentioned how he had bucked her not long ago so casually. She still wasn't used to this whole couple thing. After that, they both went back inside the house before either of the twins woke up. Several hours later, after a walk back to Aurario, with a Riveria who walked as if she was drunk. I heard from Jord. Did you really kill a Leviathan? The legendary monster. Loki exclaimed as soon as they entered the front door of Twilight Manor. Her arrival caused quite a stir, as apparently a messenger from Jord had already announced the results of his search to the family. Fortunately, Riveria was able to keep her legs under control now that she was back. Anyway, almost the entire family was forming a circle around them now, bombarding them with questions. Are you serious? Did you hurt yourself? Are you okay? Was that thing really as strong as in the legends? How did you beat that thing? They weren't going to get out of that rut until everyone knew the story of their fight, so they soon began to explain. Fortunately, Tiona loved telling stories anyway, so she did most of the talking. Tiona only occasionally had to chime in, as she liked to exaggerate a bit. Haha, good job protecting the boy from these girls. Gareth told him with a big smile after they finished their story. The other men in the family, most of them anyway, also patted Bell on the back and congratulated him on his victory. Of course, the women in the family were no less excited about this and also kept congratulating the women on the team. Finally, Loki started shouting loudly to get everyone's attention before saying, "Okay, everyone come with me so I can update your statuses." They continued, although unlike last time, they didn't update their statuses together, or well, Tiona and Tyan did because they were sisters and so they didn't mind much. Apparently, both of them had improved their stats quite a bit. Next up was Riveria. Inside the room with Loki. Riveria had taken off her clothes and turned her back to Loki, who used his powers to upgrade her fauna. Loki's eyes widened when he saw Riveria's new state just before he burst out laughing once more. What is it now, you useless goddess?" Riveria exclaimed, the tiredness in her voice quite obvious. Oh, it's nothing, tell me, did you enjoy spending the night in Milan?" Loki asked with a mischievous smile. "What do you mean?" Riveria replied. "Oh, I didn't know before either, but it seems that ability you and Bell share has a counter," Loki replied with a smile, looking at Riveria's lover's growth ability, which now said something like this. Lover's growth. Shared experiences with your partner will greatly increase your Excelia attainment. Sexual activity between them will transfer the bonus generated by this skill to the lover, effectively doubling it. Used so far. 1. Hearing that, Riveria couldn't help but tremble in pure embarrassment, unable to say another word. "Also, there's something else," Loki told him. After. Finally the door opened, revealing a bright red Riveria and a grinning Loki. Of course, everyone present, that is, almost the entire family, was wondering what that meant when Loki suddenly exclaimed. "May I introduce you? Riveria Ljos Alf. The second level 7 adventurer of Aurario." At that, everyone burst into cheers. 3 days later. The next Enitus has just been announced. "Apparently we have to bring a female and male member of our family with us," Loki said. He continued, "Since you both leveled up after that quest in Milan and are the talk of the town anyway, I decided to have you two join me. Is this okay with you? Bell? Riveria?" Loki asked the two adventurers he had called, one level 4 after his quest in Milan, the other the strongest member of the family, level 7. Chapter 6. There was a pleasant calm breeze around them, as well as the sound of a small waterfall nearby. The 18th floor of the dungeon really was beautiful. Currently, Bell and Riveria were enjoying some quality time as a couple on the 18th floor of the dungeon. Now that they'd both leveled up, they could travel back and forth between the 18th floor and the surface on their own, meaning they finally had a place where they could meet and enjoy each other's company again. However, even though Bell was now level 4, Riveria still didn't like the idea of him traveling through the dungeon alone. After all, the dungeon had a nasty tendency to bare its fangs against the weak and inexperienced most of the time. While Bell certainly wasn't that weak anymore, he was still far from experienced enough for Riveria to feel safe leaving him alone in the dungeon. She didn't even feel comfortable leaving Ace alone in the dungeon, and in terms of experience, Bell wasn't even close to Ace. However, while Riveria didn't like the idea of Bell chasing her off alone, it certainly seemed like less of an issue now that they were both lying in the shade of a tree, her snuggling up to Bell, trying to get as close to him as possible. Admittedly, the dungeon wasn't exactly the best place for lovers to meet. While the 18th floor was relatively safe, there were still monsters around that occasionally interrupted their quality time together, though Bell could now shoot every single one of these monsters with his firebolt, thanks in part to Riveria, who had shared some of her high-quality Excelia magic with him during their night in Milan. Now, as they hugged, Riveria couldn't help but ask, "Tell me, Belle, how was the way here? Did something happen? Are you hurt? Do you need?" However, Belle interrupted her with a wry smile and said, "Riveria, you've already asked that. I'd say at least 5 times now. I'm actually fine." Riveria blushed at that. In fact, she had asked him those questions more than once since they met here. "I am sorry. I guess I'm just worried about you," Riveria admitted. "Well, I appreciate you caring so much, but you really should try to trust me more. Even if I'm inexperienced, I've had my fair share of adventures now to prove I have the will to survive." Belle tried to comfort her. They both remained silent for a moment after that. "But you know, why do we have to be so secretive?" Belle couldn't help but ask. Yes, of course, at first he understood why Riveria would want to keep it a secret. After all, he had been part of a different family, and even after joining, he first needed to properly integrate into the family. Therefore, why hadn't they revealed it from the start? But now, he was sure the other elves would accept him as Riveria's boyfriend. However, when he said these things to Riveria, she only let out a dry laugh. Oh, if only these girls were the only ones needed to accept this. Belle remained silent, waiting for Riveria to explain further what she meant. Riveria took her time to think about her words before finally answering. "I also believe that these girls would already accept our relationship, but what about the other elves in the city? I know we are a powerful family, but there is no need to create more enemies than necessary. Oh, and believe me, once we inform everyone in our family, it is only a matter of time before the news spreads throughout the city." And finally, her eyes slightly clouded and seemingly filled with sadness, she said, "And, well, this may be bad, it's nothing compared to my father. You know, I'm a Princess Belle. My father was overprotective of me my entire life until I finally got his permission to leave. However, it's not like he was happy with my decision. Even now, he expects me to return home eventually after I'm done playing adventure. To top it all off, I'm the only son my father has, and elves aren't exactly known for their high birth rates, so it's very likely that it'll stay that way." Can you imagine what he'd say when he found out his only daughter, whom he needed to continue his lineage, had fallen in love with a human instead of an elf? There are stories of execution simply because a princess fell in love not with a high elf, but some other kind of elf. For Belle, this was the first time he'd heard all of this. Sure, he knew a few things about Riveria's circumstances, but he never thought things would be so complicated for her. "And even now," Riveria continued, "you might be thinking that my father doesn't have any power, and yes, that might be true. After all, they don't have a god in my home forest to give them a fauna, but he does have political power, and a lot of it too. Basically, all the elves in the world answer to his commands. Not directly, but they all acknowledge him as their rightful king. Can you imagine what would happen to the city if he turned all the elves in the city against us? Or against the guild? Worst case scenario, we might even have to fight against the guild, since they surely wouldn't care enough about two people's love to fight a civil war within the city. Even more so." Riveria seemed to rumble on and on, however, Belle had heard enough. He simply hugged her tightly and kissed her passionately. Riveria was slightly surprised, however, she didn't reject his kiss, but rather accepted it eagerly. Slowly but surely, all the tension that had built up within her thanks to all her worries began to fade from her body, and she finally began to relax once more. When they separated, Riveria didn't speak anymore, but simply lay back against Belle's chest, snuggling against him. Seeing her like this, Belle couldn't help but remember how incredibly cute this high elf could be, even if it wasn't intentional. To an outsider, this scene might have seemed quite silly, to be honest. After all, Riveria was taller than Belle, even though she was the one snuggling up to him, and to top it all off, Riveria was even several times his age. Of course, none of them cared about that. It wasn't like they planned on anyone watching them anyway. Lying like that, Riveria couldn't help but think, maybe it wouldn't be so bad if everyone knew about us after all. At least we could share moments like these more often then. Maybe we should consider telling Finn at least. Maybe even Gareth. Then they lay like that for a while, just enjoying the feel of each other's bodies. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity and yet only a brief moment, Riveria once again initiated conversation. "What do you think about that? I mean, Dennatus Loki invited us too. Yesterday. The Dennets with us. I thought these meetings were just for you gods. I think the only one humans attended was the one Apollo hosted." Riveria asked after Loki invited them to join her on the Dennatus. Loki said in reply, "Yeah, this is only the second time something like this has happened. Honestly, I find it a little suspicious, but well, I can't exactly refuse, especially with you two leveling up. You guys have weird nicknames after all anyway. I'll leave the decision up to you. I have plenty of other people who could join me, so if you feel uncomfortable, you don't have to attend. Just give it some thought, okay? Dennatus will be held in a week, so just tell me your answer until then." Back to the present. "Do you want to go?" Riveria asked Bell hesitantly, unsure if he wanted to attend. After the last Denidus he attended hadn't ended well for him and his former family. Bell, in turn, answered his question with a question of his own. Do you want to go? Riveria thought for a second, but honestly, she'd already decided to attend yesterday. Yeah, I think so. With my high level, I'll have to make some kind of public appearance sooner or later anyway, so something like a Denidus is probably a good thing for me anyway. Bell then said, in that case, I'll attend as well. Are you sure? I thought you might not want to go, given that you probably have some bad memories from the last Denidus. Riveria asked for further confirmation, worried that he was straining himself for her. However, Bell simply told her, yeah, I'm sure. No way would I miss seeing you in an evening gown, you know. With a smile. Hearing his statement, Riveria couldn't help but blush a little, however, that blush soon spread across her entire face as Bell added, I'm sure you look beautiful. Not that you wouldn't look beautiful any other time as well. Why, you know, an evening dress isn't that special. Seriously, if you wanted me to wear something special for you, you should have just asked, Riveria said, looking away, happy but embarrassed by Bell's sincere compliment. At that comment, Bell couldn't help but blurt out, wait, you mean you'd dress up for me? Even in something lewd? Riveria's blush only intensified further after hearing such a statement, even trembling a little in embarrassment, however, she managed to reply. Why yes, I would. You know, I wore a piece of lingerie just for you, silly. If no one else sees it, I wouldn't mind. At that moment, Bell couldn't help but think about all the different possibilities this opened up. What should he make her wear first? Maybe a micro bikini to really embarrass her? Or maybe a childish dress with lots of ruffles to show off her cute feminine side even more. Or maybe even a bunny suit. Hey. Earth to Bell. Riveria tried to snap him out of his daydreams by waving one of her hands in front of his face, her own face still deep red all the way to the tips of her long ears. You Oh, sorry, I got lost in my thoughts for a moment, Bell said, trying to clear his mind. Yes, and I think I can imagine what kind of thought Riveria muttered as she felt a familiar part of Bell's body dig into her side. Bell blushed a little when she mentioned his erection, but then he laughed and said, sorry, thinking about you makes me like this. It'll go away soon, so don't worry about it. Riveria let out a sigh before slowly beginning to massage Bell's erection through his pants, making him gasp in surprise and pleasure. Seriously, you're a pervert, at least let me enjoy that tool of yours too, she told him with a lustful, mocking look before leaning in to kiss him again, her hand already making its way into his pants. Oh, am I the pervert here? I'd say this lascivious elven princess is quite the pervert as well, Bell teased as he began running his hands all over her body, causing Riveria to purr like a kitten in response. Really, their continued sexual activities seemed to make them both more mature. Well, yeah, maybe more lustful or horny would be a better way to describe it. Soon, clothes were being thrown left and right between hot and passionate moments of kissing. Once again, Riveria found herself on her back, legs spread, waiting for Bell to penetrate her. She teased him further, saying, so? Will you keep my stallion today? Or will you lose yourself completely once again? He in turn just responded with a smile and said, I don't know yet. What would you prefer, my lascivious princess? I'd say it all depends on how sexy you act this time. They both couldn't help but laugh a little at that comment before Bell slowly inserted himself into his beloved girlfriend, both sharing another tender and passionate kiss. Truth be told, despite teasing Riveria about it, Bell had sworn to himself to hold back as much as possible for Riveria in the future. He certainly enjoyed his night in Milan, but it honestly scared him to death how exhausted Riveria had been and how he'd beaten her down throughout the night, making her more unconscious than conscious most of the time. Riveria, on the other hand, certainly didn't mind Bell going all out for her like that. After all, it only showed how much she could turn him on, something she was quite embarrassed about but also proud of at the same time. However, while she didn't mind him taking her as hard as he did, it would certainly make things very difficult for her. After all, she could barely make it through the dungeon on wobbly legs due to being beaten into oblivion by her lover. While she would still manage to defeat any monsters that attacked her, she certainly wouldn't want anyone to see her walking like she was drunk all the way to the dungeon entrance. While Riveria enjoyed teasing Bell about tonight and his berserker status, she certainly had to admit that it was partly her fault for teasing him with a blowjob like that. On a side note, Riveria certainly hadn't neglected her studies of the book. Loki had bought it, even after they returned from Milan, and she was happy to know that he still had multiple surprises like this in store for Bell, though she also told herself that she wouldn't reveal them just yet, but rather save them for special occasions, perhaps as a form of reward for him. Also, as much as she hated to admit this, maybe she would have to go to Loki and thank him for that book. Though she was actually too embarrassed to do that, since she knew Loki would never let her live that down. Soon, both Bell and Riveria forgot all about the world around them as they enjoyed each other to the fullest. At the same time on top of the Tower of Babel. Do you really think he'll attend? Wouldn't he be opposed to the idea after what happened with Apollo? Besides, Loki could always decide to bring Finn. He is the captain of his family, after all. Otter expressed his concerns to his goddess as he knelt behind her throne. Oh no, I'm sure he'll come. He recently leveled up, so Loki will surely invite him, and he's not some weakling who would still be scared from the past. Not after we made him overcome his fear of the Minotaur, Freya replied, absolutely certain that Bell would attend the Denitus alongside Loki. Are you sure you'll have a chance to talk to him without our help? Otter asked. Don't worry too much about it, Otter. I have the god holding this Denitus wrapped around my finger. He'll do anything I ask. I mean, for starters, he only did something like invite children like you to a Denitus meeting because I asked him to, Freya told him. I see. I'll leave all this to you then, Otter replied. A week later during Loki's family's departure to Denitus. Oh, I'm so jealous. I wish I could go too. I'm sure there's so much delicious food there. Tiona complained as Belle headed toward the carriage. Of course, she could only chuckle, imagining what it would look like if Tiona attended a rather formal evening party like this. Belle was dressed in a handsome black tuxedo. When he first wore such an outfit during the last Denitus he attended, he didn't like it very much, thinking that such high society clothing didn't suit him. However, that was different now. He had more self-confidence now, which allowed him to appreciate this type of clothing, and even he had to admit that he didn't look so bad in it. Soon enough, Belle left Tiona behind, greeting her one last time before boarding the carriage that would take them to the party. The carriage immediately drove away once Belle entered, as Riveria and Loki were already inside. That left Belle no time to look at them before sitting down. Sorry for the delay, just Belle began, but stopped talking mid-sentence when he saw Riveria in her dress for the first time. She had made sure not to show him her dress beforehand, which completely stunned him now that he was seeing her in her sleeveless off-the-shoulder green one-piece dress. It was quite tight, and honestly, Riveria's biggest fear right now was that her breasts would pop out somewhere during the party, but that look on Belle's face alone was totally worth it. She couldn't help but blush when he stared at her, however, it was almost obvious that she enjoyed all the attention he gave her, and really it was quite evident that she also seemed to really enjoy watching Belle smoking as he shyly smoked. She also stole glances at him while he watched her. Oh cute. You know, this must be the first time I've seen you two do something that could be considered flirting. Loki interrupted their mutual appreciation and added, oh, just start bucking here, okay. To tease the two. At that, they both looked away, cheeks burning bright red as Loki laughed at the two lovebirds. Then. The chariot ride was fairly short since Denitus's host god wasn't far from his home. By the time the three arrived, it seemed the party had been going on for quite some time. There were at least several dozen, perhaps even hundreds of gods and goddesses and their followers present. Well, this looks like it's going to be fun, huh? Okay, you two have fun, I'm going to have a drink or maybe 10 or something, Loki said before slipping into the crowd. Elle and Riveria, on the other hand, didn't quite know what to do as they wandered aimlessly through the crowd. Elle? Is that you? A familiar voice called from behind them. Welf? Bell asked, immediately recognizing the voice as one of his close friends, someone he still had occasional contact with, even though they were now in different families. It's really you, Bell. How are you? Welf asked as he gave Bell a firm handshake in greeting, which Bell quickly returned. Behind Welf, he could see Mikoto approaching as well, greeting him as well. Hello Bell. Hello Mikoto. You look good. He complimented her outfit, a black one-piece dress not unlike Riveria's, though of course Mikoto's beauty couldn't compare to the high elf behind him. Speaking of Riveria, these two soon noticed her as well, with Welf being the first to greet her as well. Good evening. You must be Riveria, I suppose. Thanks for looking after this guy here. He tends to get into a lot of trouble. Oh, right, and congratulations on reaching level 7, you're the talk of the town right now. Mikoto soon smacked Welf on the back of his head, saying, put some more respect, idiot. You know, even if she's a mage, she could knock you out with nothing more than a finger as a level 7. Be a little more self-aware. He then proceeded to say, I'm sorry about my friend, your lady was at Alf. I'm Mikoto and this is Welf. Like you said, thank you for looking after Bell. Mikoto, of course, had made sure not to mention Welf's last name, in case it angered an elf like Riveria. Riveria, on the other hand, couldn't help but laugh at their exchange, simply telling them, don't worry, there's no need to be so formal. I'm an adventurer too. Oh, and well, since you know Bell, I think you'll believe me that not only am I looking out for him, but that he's also helping me out from time to time. Riveria couldn't help but think about the hidden meanings that both her and Mikoto's words might imply. Taking care of me, taking care of Bell, they certainly took care of each other, though not just as family or adventure partners. If you'll excuse me now, there's someone I'd like to talk to. Have fun, you three. Riveria politely excused herself, leaving the three former members of the same family behind. Of course, that hadn't been true. Riveria didn't have anyone in particular she wanted to talk to. In fact, she would have been quite happy to stay with Bell overnight, but well, she felt he should have some time alone with his old friends, something she didn't want to intrude on. Bell, of course, would have been more than happy to keep Riveria around. After all, he wanted Mikoto and Welf to get to know her better. But hey, if she had someone she wanted to talk to, it would be wrong to stop her. Bell was really too naive for his own good. Either way, once Riveria left, both Mikoto and Welf seemed to relax a little more now. Bell then tried to get the conversation going again. So, how's it going? Oh, we're both doing pretty well. We're mostly just venturing into the higher levels of the dungeon, but we'll eventually get deeper. Slowly but steadily, Mikoto replied. That's good to hear, Bell replied before hesitantly adding, so the goddess I mean Hestia and Lily and Haraham, what about them? Are they doing well too? Welf gave an awkward smile before answering, yes, they're doing quite well. Though Hestia and Lily still seem to be, let's say, a little oversensitive. I would advise you not to try to talk to Hestia if you see her during the party. You know she came over after about a week, even tried to find you and apologize, but she didn't really take the message of you joining the Loki Familia well. Well, I guess they still don't like each other, Bell sighed, still sad about how Hestia had kicked him out. He was certainly happy to be with Riveria and his familia now, but he really wished he could have remained friends with Hestia. He'd considered her a very important friend to him. After that depressing topic was out of the way, the three continued to have idle chatter, though before long Mikoto excused herself to join Take, Aoka and Chigusa, leaving only Welf and Bell behind. The two continued to share stories from their adventures over the past few months, before Bell finally asked a question that had been bothering him for almost a month. Welf, since you're no longer working for Hephaestus and I'm no longer in your family, is our contract over? Bell had been worried about what would happen between them after he left the Familia, if they would still be friends, but Welf just smiled at him and said, what? You don't like my stuff anymore? Huh? Was all Bell could say in response to this unexpected response. Welf's smile grew even wider as he added, you know, I'm not going to lose an important client just because of some little things that happen here and there. I won't break the contract on my watch. Realizing that Welf was just making fun of him, Bell couldn't help but laugh, happy that Welf still considered him a friend and partner even after what happened. That's good to know. You know, up until now I've only been using spare weapons and armor because I didn't want to betray my trusty blacksmith, so I have an order for you, alright? Bell told him with a smile. Riveria's experience in the meantime. After Riveria left Bell's side, she managed to avoid attracting attention for a while by moving around the edges of the room and the crowd, but even that technique had its limits. Eventually, some god spotted her, approaching her to congratulate her on leveling up. Of all the people who could have come to talk to her, it had to be. Yes. I'm Ganesha. Congratulations on leveling up. Exclaimed the elephant-masked god. Damn it. Why him of all people? I can't think of any god who could draw more attention to me, Riveria thought as she felt the gazes of the people around her slowly turn towards them and eventually end up resting on her. Normally she really liked the elephant god, after all he really was the god of the masses who was loved by the people, but right now she really wanted to punch him. Ah, yes. That's right. Congratulations, Miss Alf. An elven adventurer soon joined them, quickly followed by many more gods, goddesses, and adventurers alike who wished to speak with a new level 7. From there, things only got worse, and Riveria found herself constantly surrounded by a small crowd. That crowd seemed to contain a lot of male elves for some reason, though that may just be her imagination. Loki's experience in the meantime. Loki was currently standing at the bar, already drinking his 5th glass of wine that night. He'd already had his usual argument with Hestia and a brief conversation with Hephaestus, who had separated them. After that, I had enjoyed a few more drinks. Looks like your new level 7 is getting the spotlight, huh? A voice said to the goddess of drink, a voice she knew all too well. Loki frowned and said, she really isn't that happy with the attention, I can tell, so if you're getting jealous, you just need to use that beauty of yours. I'm sure she'd be very happy to have a moment's rest. Turning around to face Freya in her evening gown. The goddess of beauty wore a long, white, sleeveless evening gown that clearly showed off her cleavage, something that would have angered Loki with any other goddess, although with Freya alone, he didn't even care anymore. Freya was sipping a glass of wine before speaking to Loki, oh, I'm sure she'd appreciate it, but I'm afraid I can't help her. After all, she'll have to learn to deal with the attention of so many people as level 7s. Although well, I suppose if she really wants a break, I wouldn't mind helping her. Of course, only if she gave me something in return. After all, I am the goddess of beauty, not charity. Well, I doubt she's desperate enough to make a deal with the devil just yet, Loki muttered, taking another long sip from his glass. Freya ignored his comment and instead continued, of course, such a deal would only make sense if I can trust her. After all, what's a deal when someone breaks their end of the contract? Hearing that, Loki's eyes widened as he glared at Freya. Are you trying to imply something here? She asked. Oh, no. I just wanted to express how much I value a good partner and how much I detest one who doesn't keep their end of the bargain, Freya replied. Well, in that case it's good that I continue with my dealings, isn't it? Loki said. For a brief moment, the two stared at each other, both smiling, but with icy eyes. It was as if they were testing each other. Freya, for her part, was obviously seeing if Loki planned to keep his end of the bargain revolving around Bell, while Loki tried to understand why exactly he would bring that up now. Of course, Loki was lying to Freya outright, as he had no intention of letting her play with Bell as she pleased, a feat not many gods could accomplish. Freya was incredibly perceptive. The only gods who could lie to her were gods of deception like Loki or Hermes. After trying to find each other's heads, they both parted, Freya simply saying, well, enjoy the rest of the party, as I'm sure I will. Loki glared at her as she disappeared into the crowd. Then he looked down at his drink, muttering, great, now I'm not even in the mood for a drink. A short time later. Loki had completely given up drinking and had instead gone to find Bell. Fortunately, he didn't have to search for long, as he soon found him outside on a balcony overlooking the gardens. The god that housed Denitus was a nature god, meaning that he and his family took great care of their home's gardens, as evidenced by the neatly trimmed bushes and grass, as well as the many flowers and trees growing vividly throughout the place. Oh, there you are, Loki called out. Why are you here alone? I thought you'd be accompanying someone. If not Riveria, then at least your friends, right? Oh, well, Riveria is a bit too crowded right now, so there's that, and my other friends, well, I guess I'd put them in a bad mood if we ran into each other, since Hestia would be pretty pissed off, Bell told her with a self-deprecating laugh. Loki then leaned on the balcony railing next to Bell and remained silent for a moment. Hey, you need a new weapon and armor, right? Loki asked suddenly. Huh? Oh, yeah, I guess so. I've just been using things from our storage. Oh, but don't worry, I'm taking care of those things on my own. I already have enough money saved up, so don't worry, Bell told him. Now that he had met with Welf and confirmed their contract once more, he would soon get a new weapon and armor for himself. That's good to hear. I assume you'll have that blacksmith, I think his name was Welf, right? You'll have Welf do it, right? Loki asked. Honestly, it was pure curiosity on her part. She didn't want to persuade him to break their contract or anything. Yes, I plan to. Why? Bell replied and then questioned Loki in turn. Loki was silent for a moment, but soon a smile appeared on his face, and he said, well, you'd better tell him to do a good job. It's not every day a blacksmith gets to work on that sort of thing. What do you mean? Bell asked, quite confused by Loki's statement. Loki then finally revealed, his smile only widening with time, the Leviathan's drop element. That thing's perfect for a new weapon, don't you think? And no way. I can't accept that. That was an achievement of all of us. Let's give it to Tiona or Tyan instead. There's no way we could have killed that thing without them standing up for me and Rivera. Bell insisted, unable to believe that Loki would choose him out of all people to receive such an incredible item. Loki chuckled and said, actually, I already talked about it with both of them. They both said I should give it to you. You deserve it, boy. But Riveria. Why not give it to her? There's no way she could have killed that thing without it. Bell argued. Don't be silly. What's a mage going to do with that item? You can't make armor out of it, and he certainly won't need a dagger, Loki reasoned with Bell, eventually adding, also, don't act like you don't know she'd practically beg you to take it if it increased your odds of survival even in the slightest, with a sneer. At that, Bell finally admitted defeat, saying, well, I guess I have no choice then, huh? I'm sure Welf will be happy with that at least, he finished with a chuckle. The two then remained silent for a moment before Bell spoke once more, what was that thing anyway? I don't know either, but it's truly unsettling. A legendary beast like that, one of the three great quests, suddenly reappearing, Loki muttered, his eyes turning into slits once more, as if he was trying to stare into the distance, hoping it would give him an answer. Jord and his men are currently investigating, trying to find any clues about that thing. Honestly, well, it's good that you killed it so quickly, there's no telling what would have happened if that thing had grown and become like the previous Leviathan, Loki said. Yeah. I'm glad we took care of that so quickly. If that thing had grown any bigger, I'm not sure we would have been able to do it, Bell had to admit. Before they could talk about anything else, they were interrupted by a doorbell ringing in the distance. Oh, sorry, I have to go. That's the signal for the gods to gather. It seems the whole naming event is starting, Loki excused himself. All the other gods were already gathering at the door of their conference room. It seemed his children wouldn't be allowed to join their discussion. Instead, they would stay here and continue having fun until the gods could join them again. Yeah, have fun, I guess, Bell said, turning toward the gardens just outside the window, indicating that he'll most likely stay here for the time being. At that, Loki couldn't help but slap him on the back, saying, "Stop acting depressed, kid. It's now or never. Now that all the gods are gone, Riveria will have more space too, so go show that girl what we practiced for last week." Bell was seriously surprised by her actions, but managed a smile nonetheless. "I suppose you're right, I'll be sure to make you proud," he assured her, though he himself wasn't as sure as Loki. Loki finally left for real. Bell then turned back to the party and walked away from the gardens, muttering, "I wonder where Riveria is." Meanwhile, Riveria's perspective. Honestly, Riveria was exhausted. She'd received so many compliments that she had no idea who she'd been talking to for the past hour or so. The only conversation she remembered was when Otter had also come over to say a few words. As he approached, the crowd surrounding her parted almost naturally. Unlike the rest of the people talking to her, instead of congratulating her, he simply said, "It's about time," giving her his usual stern, but not aggressive, look. To the people around her, it must have seemed as if he recognized her, perhaps they even thought Otter was happy to finally have a worthy opponent, but of course, they both knew that wasn't the case. Even when she'd been a level 6, Otter had respected her for her abilities, just as he did with Finn and Gareth, or his newly leveled up family members like Ace. That hadn't changed now, however, they both knew that Riveria was still far from an opponent who could beat Otter. For starters, she was a mage, not a frontline warrior, and even more than that, she'd only recently leveled up, while Otter had been a level 7 for years. In fact, he was even rumored to be on the verge of reaching level 8. Riveria knew very well that she couldn't compare to him. Anyway, that had been the most exciting meeting today. After Otter left, she was once again swarmed by people wanting to talk to her. Now that the gods had finally left for their meeting, the room was considerably less crowded, meaning Riveria finally had some breathing room, but… "Are you sure, my lady?" "I'm sure she's a great dancer," said a young elf. "Oh, no, really. I'm so sorry, but I'm not in the mood for a dance." "Perhaps another time," Riveria politely declined his advance. That must have been the 12th guy to ask for a dance by this point, and it didn't seem like these invitations were ending anytime soon. It almost seemed like the party elves were lining up to invite her to the dance floor. Of course, Riveria was a very good dancer due to her royal education that had led her to have many dance lessons in her life and quite a bit of experience dancing at formal parties like these. However, she declined any invitations. Now, it wasn't that she didn't want to dance, but not with any of these guys. In any case, it had to be Bell, but… "Oh yeah, Riveria, just to be clear. If possible, don't ask Bell to dance, okay? I saw him dance with Ace during the last Denitus, and honestly, it wasn't cute. I mean, it wasn't that bad, but that was because he copied other people's moves and Ace played along. I doubt he'd want to repeat that, especially without that kind of support." This time Loki's words flashed through her mind. When she informed Loki that he would be joining her for the Denitus, the former told her that, leading Riveria to accept the fact that she wouldn't get any chance to dance tonight. Thinking about that, she couldn't help but let out a slight sigh as she sat down on a chair at the edge of the room, another boy already approaching to make his advances on her. Just then, just before her next Prince Charming had a chance to speak, Belle appeared out of nowhere and interrupted. "Hey, do you want to talk to Riveria?" "Yeah, sorry, but you'll have to wait a second, okay? I have something to discuss with my fellow family member." Of course, just looking at that guy was enough to know that he really didn't like Bell stopping his advance, but well, Bell didn't seem to mind as he just left him standing there in amazement instead of walking towards Riveria. "Hey, enjoying the party?" he asked, raising his hand to wave at her. Riveria let out a sigh, saying, "What do you think?" with a slightly sarcastic tone in her voice. "Yeah, I was expecting something like that," Bell said with a wry smile. He then extended a hand toward her and asked, "In that case, how about a little dance to wash away all that stress and boredom?" with a bright smile on his face. Riveria's eyes widened at that. She couldn't help but ask, "Dance? With you? But I thought you didn't know how to dance." Bell's smile only grew wider from there as he replied, "Would you mind finding out?" Without another word, Riveria took his hand and he led her to the dance floor, past the man she had just interrupted and all the elves whose offers had already been rejected. Just before the music started, he interlocked his fingers with hers and pulled her towards him, his other hand resting on her hips, Riveria in turn placing her hands in the same way. Then the music started. It was a slow dance, and none of them seemed to have any trouble with the rhythm. Of course, that didn't come as a surprise to Riveria, though it wasn't like she was leading him or anything. Bell seemed to move completely naturally, almost as if he were already an expert at the dance. "I have to say I'm surprised Loki said you couldn't dance," Riveria told him as their bodies slowly swayed back and forth. She did. How strange after all, she was the one teaching me how to dance for the past week, Bell expressed his surprise, revealing that he had been practicing with Loki in every free moment he had for the past week. That had been Loki's idea. Once he told her he'd be joining her for the Denitus, she'd asked if he could dance, to which he refused. Since then, she'd taught him how to dance, telling him not to let Riveria down. However, make no mistake. It wasn't as if Bell had been forced to do it. Hearing that Riveria was a great dancer, he truly desired to have at least one dance with her, and once Bell set his mind to something, he could perform extraordinary feats. Within a week, he'd gone from a total novice to a seasoned dancer who could follow the flow of the music as if he were swimming freely in a river. Riveria, on the other hand, was once again reminded of her own goddess's scheming nature, though only this time did she feel like forgiving her. After all, today had brought her quite the pleasant surprise, something Loki had obviously planned from the start. "Thank you for trying so hard for me," Riveria whispered into Bell's ear after that, both of them getting closer as each of their heads rested on the other's shoulder. "That's nothing. You know I'd do anything for you," Bell whispered. From there, the song began to pick up speed and they both stopped talking, instead giving themselves over to the music as their bodies, tightly entwined, followed the rhythm. Honestly, Riveria was truly surprised. This was different. Completely new. She'd had her fair share of dances at parties like this, but none of them had been like this. All of them had been stiff and emotionless, simply following a set of instructions over and over while maintaining a blank face. However, this dance was completely different. It was filled with passion and love. And that was also evident to the people around them. At first, there were many couples on the dance floor, surrounding them, however now all of them had stepped back, instead of dancing, now looking at the two of them in awe. The musicians were getting into it now too. Seeing them dance like this, each and every one of them began to pour their heart and soul into their music, only intensifying the elf and his human partners dancing even further. As they danced freely through the music, they both hugged each other tightly as their emotions began to take over, and they both completely forgot where they were and who was watching, now they only had eyes for each other. This is wonderful, Riveria thought as they twirled and took step after step across the dance floor. So, finally the song ended. The two now put a little more distance between them, looking into each other's eyes. A voice in the back of her head seemed to demand, and really, that didn't sound like a bad idea right now. Riveria enjoyed that thought very much. She soon leaned forward, her hands already traveling towards Bell's face to pull him in when. Applaud. 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 The crowd around her began to applaud her dance now that the song had ended, excited to have witnessed such skillful and passionate dancing. That applause was enough to bring them both out of their trance-like state, reminding them where they were and who was watching. They quickly let go of each other, both red-faced with embarrassment, as they both knew they had only narrowly avoided a kiss just then. They hurried off the dance floor after that, both going their separate ways, fearing that people would get the wrong impression correction, even more of a wrong impression of their relationship. Well, it's not that the impression they had now was wrong, it just wasn't an impression they'd planned to give. Once Bell re-entered the crowd, some of his friends greeted him, congratulated him, and praised his dancing. After all, they had never known he was such a good dancer. Hearing their praise, Bell could only rub his head sheepishly. Riveria, on the other hand, was swarming with elves the moment she re-entered the crowd. They were bombarding her with questions like, why would you dance with a human? You're a princess, Milady. You can't interact with a lowly human like that. And why would you dance with him but not with us? That subsequent question was especially prominent, with many, if not all, claiming that they were easily better dancers than Bell and that Riveria should give them a chance. It seemed like Riveria would be back in the spotlight. A short time later. Bell, on the other hand, was soon separated by his friends again, this time by a party waiter. Mr. Cranel. I'm sorry to interrupt your conversation, but we need you right now. Me? Bell asked, giving him a curious look that was shared by his friends. Yes, there's someone who wants to meet you. It's very important, the waiter said, prompting Bell to leave his friends behind and follow the waiter. Who is it? Bell asked as he was led away. You'll find out soon enough, was the only response he got. The waiter led him downstairs, gestured for him to continue without him, and then said, please go to the garden, before disappearing back upstairs. Unlike the ballroom, the gardens were completely deserted. This was because normally no one was allowed inside, as the family god feared for his garden. Bell entered the green world of flowers and trees, following the paths that lead through this wonderful garden. Very soon he found someone waiting for him. Someone I had barely met before, but someone whose eyes I was quite familiar with. Goddess Freya. Are you the one who called me? Bell asked when he saw her turn to him with a smile. That's right, Bell Cranel. Oh, you don't mind if I just say Bell, do you? Freya said in her usual calm, dignified yet seductive voice. No, not at all, goddess, Belle replied, slightly blushing at her attractive white dress. Of course, he was already used to seeing Riveria's body, though it wasn't as if he wouldn't get aroused when he saw Riveria, and well with Riveria it was fine, but with another woman. It felt like cheating on Riveria, even if he didn't do anything to Freya, so this whole situation made him feel quite uncomfortable. Why did you call me here? Shouldn't you be with the other gods right now? Belle asked, trying to move the conversation forward, hoping they would be over soon so he could escape. Oh, well, you know these meetings can get so boring, Freya said, not saying it directly, but clearly implying that she had slipped away on her own. I see, Belle simply said, not knowing how to react. I heard you leveled up, didn't you? Congratulations in that case, Belle, Freya then furthered the conversation. Oh, thanks, though you should probably tell that to Riveria. Level 4 isn't uncommon, I imagine many of your family members would be at that level as well, Belle said, rubbing his head sheepishly due to Freya's praise. Oh, don't be silly. Even if it's more common, it's still something many people can only dream of, and it takes a lot of courage to overcome an obstacle that would be enough to take you to the next level. Freya continued her praise. Well, if you say so, Belle once again responded timidly. And to think you joined Loki's family a month ago, quite commendable, really, Freya said. What's she like? I mean, in her family. You know, she and we have our disagreements from time to time, but we're old friends, so I care a lot about the well-being of not only my family, but her children's as well, Freya finally asked. It's great. At first it was a little awkward, and a lot of people seemed to be jealous or mad at me. I think they thought I was some kind of hero who took pride in their accomplishments to the point where I wouldn't even talk to them, but now it's all better. I've made friends with most of them and I doubt anyone still sees me that way, Belle answered honestly. I see. That's good to hear, Freya said, before losing herself in thought for a moment. So what would you say if I ask you to join my own family? Freya continued. Excuse me? Belle could only blurt out, taken aback by such a sudden question. Well, you know, you've caught my interest for a long time now. Even before the war game happened, I was very interested in you, so I would very much like for you to join my family. I already spoke to Loki about it, and she said she wouldn't mind if you wanted to move into my family either, Freya told her. Of course, that last part about Loki was more or less made up, however, if that trickster was to be believed at least partially, then at least it wouldn't stop Belle if he wished to convert to her family. However, such thoughts were going through Freya's mind. No, sorry. I'm quite happy with my current family, Belle was quick to reply. What? Freya could only ask in surprise. At that, Belle gave him an apologetic smile. I'm sorry, but I already have a lot of friends here, people who are very important to me, so I'd rather stay with Loki. But Freya didn't know what to say. That wasn't what she expected, or maybe it was. Soon, tears began to form on Freya's beautiful face, and she began to sob. What's wrong, goddess? Did I say something wrong? Belle asked, worried that he had made some kind of mistake when the goddess in front of him turned into a teary-eyed mess. Why you rejected my offer even though I love you so much, you don't want to be with me? Freya cried, her voice breaking more and more with every word. I don't think I can live without you. What's going on? Belle, of course, was completely unable to handle the situation. He had been able to handle Riveria's crying back then, before the war game, but this was so unexpected. Why was Freya crying over someone she barely knew? Please. Will you really not come join me? Freya cried, almost begging him to join her. However. Sorry I can't. Belle still managed to squeeze out those words, even though it hurt him a lot to reject a crying girl. At that, Freya's crying abruptly stopped. It had all been an act. An act to make Belle join her in pity, but now that she knew it didn't work, she gave up on her act rather than do something she tried to avoid until now. Freya's eyes flashed silver, indicating the use of one of her divine abilities, an amulet, in fact, the most powerful amulet in this world, several times stronger than what any monster could handle, and even more potent than what Ishtar could do. Are you really sure you don't wish to join me? Freya asked, knowing there was no way he would resist now, however, once again. And no, I don't want to regret it yet, Belle told her, obviously completely unfazed by her charm. If anything, he was puzzled as to why her crying had stopped so suddenly. What? Why? I'm the goddess of beauty, how can you resist me? Freya could only stammer. She had been so caught off guard that she couldn't hide her true intentions there for a moment. I'm sorry, Belle said, only then did he finally reveal something to her. I'm so sorry, but I already have someone I'm in love with. Sure, you may be beautiful, but to me that woman is the most beautiful thing in the world, and I want to be by her side no matter what. Hearing these words, Freya was completely speechless. She could only stare at him in bewilderment. I'm sorry if you'll excuse me, Belle said now, wanting to end this conversation before things got complicated. Oh, yeah. sorry for taking your time. Please don't overthink this. Just a goddess's whim, haha. Freya tried to downplay her failure to catch Bell. Then he turned around and left Freya there, the woman could only watch him as he walked away. Meanwhile on top of a nearby balcony. Riveria clasped her hands in front of her mouth, trying to muffle any sound she might make as she cried tears of joy. Just a few minutes earlier, still being bombarded by dance requests from the elves surrounding her, she'd received unexpected help from Asfi. With the help of some elves with more manners than those surrounding her, Asfi had distracted them and given Riveria one of her special items, which granted the ability to make its wearer invisible. That had prompted an invisible Riveria to flee the room and head for a nearby balcony. From there, she'd encountered a more unexpected scene in the gardens before her. And that scene had touched her heart like no other. She'd heard every word of Bell and Freya's conversation, and it had moved her to tears to hear him speak of her like that. Contrary to what their relationship suggested, neither of them had said the words "I love you" to the other yet, something that had always bothered Riveria. She'd always thought, mainly due to Bell's skill with Lyra's Freeze, that there might still be other women in his life, but hearing him say those things about her was enough to finally put those worries to rest. Riviera could hardly contain her happiness. Perhaps, once they had some well-deserved time together again, she would have to reward him with one of the things she'd kept hidden for the time being. She felt he deserved a reward for this. In fact, at this moment, she felt she'd do anything for him. Meanwhile with Bell. Bell had already left the gardens by now. He wanted to return to the party now. He had a strong desire to see, to talk, to feel Riveria again after this experience, however. Before he made it back up to the feast hall, he found himself surrounded by a group, perhaps a dozen or so, of male elves. They were the same people who had pestered Riveria for a dance a few minutes earlier. Now that Riveria was gone and they couldn't keep asking her to dance, their desire to prove themselves had turned into anger toward Bell, which led them to search for him. They couldn't find him in the party room, which led them to look elsewhere, and now, finally, they found him. "Hello. Sorry to interrupt you," one of the elves, the one Bell had cut off before his dance with Riveria, called out with a wicked smile. "Hey, any business you have with me?" Bell asked, trying to remain calm and composed, though he obviously felt the animosity of the elf and his companions. The elf, more or less the leader of the group apparently, abandoned his act, which was already pretty bad, now looked at Bell and said, "Sure you are. You're that brat who danced with our princess and we're here to show you your place, you Avildor. Listen. I really don't want any trouble. I promise you there's nothing between her and me. We're just ordinary adventurers, members of the same family, that's all," he replied, trying to calm the elves, however. "Oh, we know. There's no way a woman like our princess would find any interest in a brat like you when she could have elves like us," one of the other elves said to Bell. So Bell began, hoping to avoid a conflict, however, he was interrupted by a third elf. "However, you didn't seem to understand that. That's why we'll show you your place now." Bell wanted to talk about this, however, before he could open his mouth, the elves already rushed towards him. Very soon, the first pair of fists were thrown in his direction, however. He dodged them. And without much effort either. Bell thought, dodging another pair of fists before kicking his owner in the face and knocking him out in one hit, too weak. The remaining elves, angered by the fall of their comrade, rushed at Bell at once, but he nimbly evaded all their attacks, knocking them down one after another with clean blows. Honestly, they weren't actually that weak. Some of them were even level 4 too. But Bell's training and experience with the Lefiya Filvis were starting to pay off. Compared to Aza's swiftness and Tiona's strength, these guys were nothing more than small fry in a minute, he'd taken care of all of them. The only thing that showed he'd gotten into a fight were the few drops of sweat on his face and the pile of bodies he left behind. Just as Bell re-entered the party room, the door opened to reveal the gods and goddesses returning from their meeting. Bell had just entered the room when he saw a smiling, blushing Riveria approach him, even going so far as to hug him. Fortunately for the two of them, everyone was too focused on the gods' reappearance to worry about Bell and Riveria. "Hey Riveria. See, pull yourself together, okay? Remember where we are." Bell hissed in panic that someone might see them. Only when Riveria separated from Bell did she speak to him. "Sorry. I was so happy to see you." Of course, seeing his girlfriend so happy, smiling at him, Bell couldn't be angry with her for a moment. "Any reason you're in such a good mood?" Bell asked. "That's a secret," he told her, although he added, "However, you might find out sometime in the near future," jokingly. "I understand, I think." Bell replied, unsure of what he should say now. "Anyway, what's going on?" Bell asked, turning his attention back to the gods. "Apparently they'll read out the names they've decided on, so everyone here doesn't have to wait until they're revealed tomorrow," Riveria replied. At that moment, Loki approached them, joining the two in the crowd. "Yo. Looks like you guys had fun here while I was working hard getting you guys good names," he said. Just as they wanted to say something, a follower of the host god began reading the list of adventurer names that the gods had decided, starting from low-level adventurers to high-level ones. Soon it was Bell's turn. Bell Cranel level 4 Lefiya Filvis. Your new name, as decided by the gods, will be Argonaut. Argonaut, Bell and Riveria repeated, causing Loki to chuckle. Well, Tiona seemed to really like that name, and the other gods thought you were like a little hero too, so I suggested that name as a joke, and then, surprisingly, they decided to use it, Loki explained. Well, I guess it's not so bad. It's not like I can change it now anyway, Bell said, quickly accepting his new adventurer name. The trio didn't have to wait much longer until Riveria's name was also called out. Riveria Ljos Alf level 7 Lefiya Filvis. Your new name, decided by the gods, will be Queen of Magic. At that, the entire crowd started to applaud. After all, Riveria was basically the star of the night, even more so thanks to her dance with Bell, which the gods thankfully hadn't seen. Queen of Magic, huh? That's a good name, I think. It suits you. Now you're not just a princess, but a queen too, Bell told her with a smile. Riveria also seemed to like her new name, though she couldn't help but say, well, I guess I like it, but you know, me as queen and Otter as king, I'm sure the two of us would make a horrible couple. Both Riveria and Bell couldn't help but laugh at that. I'm glad you both like your new names, Loki said, before jokingly adding, though I personally would have preferred bride and groom. I almost suggested that too. Her two followers blushed at that, hoping no one around them would hear their foolish goddess. After that, the three left the party. Loki no longer wanted to deal with Freya, who seemed to have disappeared to who knows where in the middle of the gathering. Riveria didn't want to deal with more elves trying to dance with her. And Bell didn't want to deal with what would happen once someone found the pile of unconscious elves on the lower floor of the mansion. The next day at the top of the Tower of Babel. Freya had been silent for almost a full day now. She had only briefly instructed Otter and his female assistant to leave yesterday and hadn't said a word since. Otter was worried about her, while blaming himself. Damn it. Why did I let her do this alone? I should have helped her. Of course, it didn't help that the rest of his family, especially Alan, seemed to blame him for Freya's current state. Otter? Are you there? Freya suddenly called out. Yes, my goddess. He replied immediately, willing to do anything to make her smile again. Of course, he would prefer to avoid war with the Loki family, however if that was what his goddess wished, then he would do it. Fortunately, those worries were unnecessary, however. I want you to do something for me, Freya instructed. Everything, was the only word Otter needed to answer. Freya then turned to look at Otter, a captivating smile on her face. She said, Bell Cranel. He rejected me yesterday. Of course, Otter could hardly believe her words, his eyes widening in surprise. However, Freya simply continued, he said he was already in love with someone else. And finally, he relayed his orders. I want you to find out who that someone is, and then I want you to join me, along with perhaps a few other members of our family, for a little friendly chat between her and me. Freya may have smiled as she spoke those words, but her eyes were sharp and murderous. They were so intense that even a warrior like Otter couldn't help but flinch under her gaze. Yes, my goddess, he said to her, before leaving to complete his assigned mission. Now completely alone in her room, Freya muttered to herself, just you wait, once I know who you are, I'll make you pay. Pay for stealing my man. I'll make you regret the day you were born, boar. Chapter 7. The days following the Denidus were surprisingly quiet, honestly. The attention around Riveria and its upper echelon, of course, didn't die down after a single night, so she was still swamped with work and people to meet with, leaving her with no free time to see Bell, but really that wasn't so bad. In fact, she even appreciated it. Now don't get me wrong, she would have liked nothing more than to spend each day lying in his arms, but well, she was planning to reward him with something special for how he rejected Freya during the Denidus, and she would need time to prepare for that. Truth be told, she had been pondering what to do for him for the past few days and hadn't really decided anything so far, but today she had finally decided on her course of action. After all, she wouldn't keep him waiting too long. Yes, she would begin her preparations immediately. She would have to, after everything she decided to do. Riveria froze in the middle of the street, causing several people to nearly run into her. However, the elf didn't notice. She felt too ashamed of herself because of her thoughts and the action she would take in the foreseeable future, her embarrassment quite evident due to her bright red face and ears. Bell, on the other hand, had returned to his usual routine of dungeon prowling. As a level 4, he was now an important part of the Lefiya Filvis secondary group, consisting primarily of Raul, Aki, and several others. Throughout the days following the Denidus, he had continued leveling up in the dungeon as usual, as, unlike Riveria, he didn't have any obligations he needed to attend to. That led to his status already being at the peak of level 4 again. Most of his stats were already low CS, with his agility already passing the B mark, something that, of course, was only possible due to the skills engraved on his back. Aside from the adventures, the only notable thing that had happened in the past few days for Bell was meeting with Welf to talk to him about his new weapon. Needless to say, Welf had been overjoyed and grinning like a child before receiving his Christmas presents when Bell told him about the object he would be working on. Honestly, it seemed like Welf would just jump up to him and kiss him with joy. Either way, not wanting to waste such a precious item, Welf had told Bell that he would take his time with this weapon to ensure it came out as smoothly as possible, something Bell certainly didn't mind. Thus the two lovers spent the following days until. "Hey, do you see that?" One of the city guards, a member of the Ganesha family, asked his companion, squinting as he looked into the distance. "What do you want?" The other guard had begun, but quickly fell silent upon seeing what his friend had meant. Instead, he just muttered, "Are those people?" That day, a wave of refugees had arrived in Riveria. Of course, the guild had responded quickly. They took them in and provided temporary shelter while giving them food and water, trying to calm them down and discover the cause of this whole incident. Obviously, the appearance of such a large group of people had aroused general interest, and that led to many gods and goddesses making their rounds around the refugee camp, either to calm and help them or out of pure curiosity and amusement, although those gods were obviously not exactly well received by the refugees. Loki had also entered the camp, though unlike the other gods, she didn't belong to either of those two types of gods. The guild had called her here. Honestly, she could already sense another difficult situation brewing, but well, she had to admit she was curious to know what had happened, so she quickly agreed and met here anyway. Loki entered a large tent in the middle of the camp and was greeted by a group of guild employees, as well as Royman, the guild leader, and an old man, perhaps the leader of the refugees. "Me? Did you call me?" Loki greeted them in his usual carefree tone. "Ah, Goddess Loki. I'm glad you came." Royman hurried to greet her before introducing her to the old man. "This here is Moss, he's the leader of this group of refugees." "Nice to meet you. I didn't think I'd ever see a goddess with my own eyes, but here I am in Riveria, gods and goddesses all around me," he murmured. Loki nodded at him, but quickly got to the point. "So, what am I doing here? Or, more accurately, what are you doing here?" Old man Moss looked down at his feet with a grim expression, obviously having trouble speaking. Instead, Royman told it. He and the rest of the people here are from several small towns far from here. They were attacked by a monster, and that's why they had to leave their homes. At that moment, Moss interrupted him, muttering, "That thing wasn't a monster, that thing was destruction incarnate." Royman then continued, ignoring the old man, "Like I said, they were attacked by a monster, and well, this man here says it was." He paused for a moment to look at the man again before saying, "He claims they were attacked by the behemoth." "It's the truth." Moss shouts, but some of the guild girls rush to calm him down. Royman and Loki then move a little further away from him to discuss this privately. "Is he telling the truth?" Royman whispered, knowing well enough that Loki should be able to tell whether he was lying or not, something Royman very much hoped for. However, Loki simply nodded with a grave expression on his face. Yes, at least he himself believes that monster is really the behemoth. Royman paled after this confirmation, though he quickly regained his composure. Well, I suppose after the recent incident, it might not be too far-fetched," he admitted. "Well? Sir Guildmaster, what now? Was that the only reason you called me here? To answer you something that any other god or goddess could have done as well?" Loki asked in his usual playful manner, though he could already guess what Royman had in mind. Royman was silent for a moment before saying, "I'd like you to look into this matter. If this is a similar case to Milan's, we could be in big trouble if we don't deal with this soon." Loki let out a sigh and said, "Well, I expected as much. One question. Why my family again? Can't you let that pervert handle it this time?" Of course, that pervert turned out to be none other than Freya, something Royman knew anyway. Nonetheless, he tried to remain professional, telling her, "As for the goddess Freya," he began, though here he let his true emotions shine through slightly, adding, "She told my messenger that she had more important matters to take care of," with a disapproving frown. "Well, I guess that just leaves you with us," Loki replied, already knowing well enough that the thing Freya needed to take care of probably had a connection to Bell. After that, things got moving pretty quickly. The Loki Familia had prepared another special group for this mission, composed of the highest elites of the Familia. However, this time the situation was slightly different. For one thing, this time they knew what they would be up against, meaning they could prepare in advance. On top of that, the supposed newborn behemoth wasn't at sea, actively devastating the lives of civilians in a commercial city, but somewhere in an open flat field, so it wasn't as urgent a matter of killing it. Instead, they had been tasked with investigating it. They had been told to check on the behemoth's current status and, if they saw an opportunity to do so, kill it. Otherwise, if they deemed it too dangerous to fight alone, they would return to the city to get reinforcements. Finally, the last difference was in the group's conduct of this mission. They had been allowed to bring an additional member with them this time. In fact, they could have brought more people with them, but Loki and Finn had deemed it better to have a small group that could move faster and coordinate more quickly than to have a large group of people there. Speaking of coordination and quick movement, those were the main reasons for the team's lineup, once again composed of Riveria, Tiona, Tyan, and Bell, with the final addition of Aze as the fifth member this time. Riveria had been chosen as a leader, and as a level 7, she was an invaluable asset on a mission like this. Tiona and Tyan had been chosen for their teamwork, in addition to the fact that they had already experienced the Leviathan. Bell had been chosen as the team's ace in the hole. After all, no one doubted his worth after fighting the Leviathan together. Every single member of the team would have admitted there was no way they could have won without Bell back then. On top of that, Loki knew Freya was plotting something involving Bell, so ironically, he might be safer fighting the behemoth than staying here. Aze had been chosen for the final edition because of her wind power, which gave her almost unparalleled speed, as well as the fact that she got along well with every member of the team, meaning she could easily coordinate with them. That had also been a candidate solely for her speed, but her rebellious nature wasn't well suited for such an important mission. Of course, he didn't take the fact that he'd be left behind very well, but he'd eventually overcome it. However, it was true that both Finn and Gareth would have loved to go too. They'd both been stuck on level 6 for what seemed like an eternity, and now that Riveria had surpassed them, they had every reason to try and catch up to her, but they both knew they had to give up here. There was no reason for either of them to be in this party. Gareth would slow them down since he wasn't as fast as Aze or the twins, and they were hoping to avoid battle with such a small group anyway, so a tank wasn't really needed. Finn might have been able to act as the leader, but there wasn't much reason for him to be working in such a small team that was already pretty good at coordinating. Once the group was decided, each member began to prepare individually for the task until the day of their departure. For Bell, that meant he'd informed Welf of his mission and asked if he could finish his new weapon before his departure. Welf truly wished to do so, but he'd honestly told Bell he wouldn't be able to finish it in time, which Bell accepted, not that he had much of a choice. Though since Welf still wanted to support Bell as his blacksmith, he gave him one of his famous magic swords and told him to make do with this for now until he could get him his real weapon. Bell, of course, enthusiastically accepted, happy for any kind of help. For Riveria, preparing for the mission meant visiting the guild every day to research everything she could about the behemoth. Well, that, and taking care of her other preparations. Soon enough, the group set off, the remaining family members greeting and cheering them on, well, everyone except Bet, though even he'd gone out of his way to snarl at them this morning. "You'd better come back alive and catch me so I can wreck that thing later." It wasn't long after that the carriage left the city gates and even left the city as a whole behind. Fiona was excited, as always, as she watched the scenery outside fly by. "We're going on another adventure, aren't you happy, Argonaut?" asked the cheerful Amazon, smiling at Bell. "Why yeah, Tiona, just don't you think we should be a little more serious? I mean, this mission is important and all," Bell replied, clearly much more nervous now than he had been before the battle with the Leviathan in Milan. Most likely due to the behemoth's reputation as a legendary beast. After all, they had no idea what awaited them in Milan, but this time was different. "Relax, Bell. The worst thing you can do is worry unnecessarily. We're not here to eliminate the beast at all costs, just to investigate," Riveria told him in a calm voice that in turn seemed to help him relax as well. However, it was admittedly a little ironic to hear the worst thing you can do is worry unnecessarily from the person who still had a bad feeling about leaving him alone in the dungeon, despite its level 4 status. Unfortunately for them, this trip would take longer than the previous one, as the destination was a fairly remote village, nowhere near Rario. The travel time would be at least a week, so 2 weeks in total. Of course, they didn't stop preparing for their mission even then, however, despite all the tension of the upcoming battle, they had a rather joyful and uplifting journey. Most nights, they would sit around a small campfire while talking until the wee hours, thanks to the wonderful weather they had, although even during that joyful time, there was a small downside. No matter how much they would have liked to, Bell and Riveria just couldn't have any time alone together. They would have loved nothing more than to snuggle up in front of the fire or share a blanket at night, but of course, that was completely impossible not only with the twins, but even with Aze at this time. That's why Riveria also had to satisfy her desires in some other way. Riveria let out a low, stifled moan as she watched Bell sleeping soundly in front of her. She'd just have to get up and crawl under her blanket. He was so close yet so incredibly far away. Currently, her fingers were eagerly working beneath the blanket to relieve some of her stress, while imagining all the wonderful things she would do with Bell if she had the chance to. Her thighs were already soaked in her love juices, and since she had always been quite noisy in bed, she did her best to suppress her moans. Of course, not because of Bell or the twins, all three of them were already fast asleep under their respective blankets, but because. Riveria? Are you okay? Ace asked, tilting her head tenderly, though there was some obvious concern in her voice. Oh Ace. Why, you don't have to worry, I'm fine. Riveria told him, a little surprised that he had spoken to her in the middle of masturbating. Suddenly, her fingers quickly moved away from her naughty parts. Are you sure? You were moaning like you were in pain, and your face is bright red. Are you in pain? The blonde asked. And no, I'm really fine, believe me Ace. Just go back to sleep, okay? Riveria replied, for once grateful for the girl's natural airheadedness. Okay, if you say so, Ace says before turning away from Riveria and going back to sleep. Of course Ace wasn't that dumb. She could very well tell when a woman was masturbating. After all, it wasn't something completely foreign to her alone. She didn't want to believe that Riveria would ever do something like that. Anyone would, but not her maternal figure, the pure, strict, and perhaps a little cold Riveria. No, I'm sure it's like she says, it's nothing, Ace said to herself, her face bright red, trying to ignore Riveria as her moans began to increase again, as well as her level 6 senses that allowed her to easily pick up on the wet crawling sounds coming from under Riveria's blanket. After the group had traveled for a week, they found themselves approaching a mountainous region. They stopped in front of it, Riveria leaning over a map with concern all over her face. What's up, Riveria? Bell asked, the rest of the group clearly also worried about their leader. This isn't right, there shouldn't be a mountain range here. This should all be flat land, the land where the shelters came from, Riveria explained, worried that she might have misread the map and taken a wrong turn somewhere, but. Roar. Before he could worry further, he could hear a distant roar from the mountain range. Despite being several kilometers away, they could already hear that roar, which meant that whatever produced it must have been extremely large. Of course, everyone immediately went into combat mode, knowing full well that this was no ordinary roar. They nodded at each other, and Riveria only had one word to say. Let's go. They left their horses and carriage back there, worried that they might flee in fear if the beast roared once more, making sure to tie the horses to a tree so they wouldn't run away once they returned. Very soon, they had entered the mountain range. It really didn't look anything like the original map anymore. There were now large mountains, as well as deep valleys, almost as if the beast had dug into the ground for some reason, only on an incredibly large scale. He must have gone after the bones, just like Ma said, Riveria murmured upon seeing such a peculiar valley. Riveria, of course, had not only prepared by reviewing the guild records of Zeus Familia's battle against the behemoth, but it also made sure to gather information from the refugees, one of whom, Moss, had told her more about the villages they came from. Apparently, they had been relatively close to the place where Zeus Familia had fought the behemoth once. During that battle, many of them lost their lives and their homes, as the adventurers were unable to defend them while fighting a beast like that. Apparently, the Zeus family had decided to bury the behemoth's bones throughout the area to keep all the monsters away from the villages in the future, to repent for their mistakes and prevent further tragedy. Moss told Riveria that he suspects this was what caused the newborn behemoth to seek out such remote villages, something that would line up quite well with the Leviathan incident, as it had also gone to the place where the Leviathan bones could be found. Either way, they crept stealthily through the mountain range until they found a large cave. The roaring hadn't reappeared while they'd been coming here, and even now it was nowhere to be found. However, they did find something, namely, a napping sound originating from the cave in front of them. Without anyone saying a word, they entered the cave. They walked through it for several minutes before finally reaching their destination. A large purple beast that resembled a boar. There was no doubt about it, this was the behemoth. Although technically still a child, the beast was definitely much larger than the Leviathan, meaning it was already much more mature. The five hid behind a large rock nearby to discuss their plan. What do you think? Tyan whispered to Riveria. He took a moment to go over all the available information in his head and replied, it's definitely much larger than the Leviathan, and if this newly created mountain range is any indicator, this thing also has a lot more power. I think it would be our best bet to leave and get reinforcements. Of course, the battle will be even harder, since we'll give it another 2 weeks to mature, but I don't think we can take it down now. No. We should eliminate him. A strongly objected to Riveria's calm analysis, causing everyone to look at her in astonishment. A's, try to come to your senses. We don't have enough people to handle this, Riveria tried to calm her down. B, but didn't you take down the Leviathan too? What makes you say we can't do this? A's voice was getting louder and louder, something that was definitely not good besides a sleeping beast. We needed both my magic and Bell's ability to do that, and with the amount of power it'll need to produce, Bell's ability will be incredibly loud. The behemoth will definitely wake up, and I don't want you three to have to defend ourselves against it. That thing is much stronger than the Leviathan, and it's not confined to water either, Riveria explained, trying to keep Ace calm. Also, if the guild records are to be believed, the behemoth is incredibly resistant to any magical attacks, so there's a chance we wouldn't even be able to take it down with such an attack, Riveria once again gave voice to her thoughts. Then I will. If we can't kill him with magic, then I will. Ace told him. The group was completely lost here. Why was Ace so insistent on fighting the behemoth? Well, everyone was lost, except for Riveria, who had already feared such a thing would happen, after everything she knew of Ace's intense hatred for monsters. Now, even if that aspect of her had improved over the years, there was never a guarantee that she wouldn't fall back into her hate-filled mentality at some point. Riveria reached out a hand towards Ace, but the swordswoman jumped back, saying, "Don't touch me." Ace Riveria could only mutter. "Why you've been so weird lately?" Ace shouted, finally expressing what she'd wanted to say to her for a while. "Even at home, you were weird. You entered the dungeon on any day you had free, something you normally never do. And every time I asked you what you were doing, you told me it was a secret. But even on this trip. Why you?" "Ace, calm down, okay? Let's discuss this another time," Riveria tried to calm her, painfully aware that the beast was sleeping just feet away from them, but. "No. I want an answer now. What's wrong with you lately? I really admire you, but why would you do those things every night? What a night, right?" Ace accused the elf, her face bright red. Of course, Riveria's eyes widened at that, her face also instantly blushing, now that she knew Ace had realized what she had been doing all this time. However, unexpectedly, Tyan joined the conversation again here. While Bell and Tiona were obviously shocked by such an accusation, and both seemed to blush at the thought of Riveria pleasuring herself under their blanket, Tyan seemed to be quite calm about it. She tried to calm Ace down as well, saying, "Yeah, Riveria's been acting strange lately, but well isn't that her kind of thing? Every night, but she's a woman too, you know." Revealing that she too knew very well what Riveria had been doing every night under that blanket of hers. "Listen Ace, I'm sure there's an explanation for this, okay? But let's discuss this somewhere else, okay?" Tyan helped Ace calm down. Finally, Ace let out a sigh and said to the four of them, okay, clearly unhappy about this, but able to come to her senses again. Only then. Raw. The beast had awakened. The 5 heads shot toward the behemoth, and when they saw that it had opened its eyes, a pair of large yellow slits, each of them shot out of the cave at full speed. Whether they would fight now or not, they knew it wasn't wise to fight in such a tight space. As soon as they left the cave, the entire mountain burst open. The behemoth had easily and effortlessly ripped it apart when it emerged, enraged at having been awakened from its slumber. At the last moment, Ace realized how terrifying that monster really was. She and the others fled at full speed, but the behemoth was much bigger than them. When it started running after them once it had spotted them, it began to easily catch up. "TSK. Looks like we have no choice but to fight now," Riveria said, switching to battle mode now. She'd have time to agonize over Ace and Tyan's overhearing of her nighttime activities, so now she needed to command this group. "The thing is fast, but it should be difficult for it to slow down. We have to let it pass and then attack as it passes," he ordered, each of the team members indicating that they had understood. The group drew their weapons, Bell in particular, the magic fire sword Welf had given him. At that moment, the behemoth caught up, but just as Riveria expected, the thing was practically unable to slow down once it reached its maximum speed. The group pursued its attack sideways, causing the behemoth to run past them. Everyone used their respective attack at that moment. Riveria unleashed a spell she chanted as she ran, while Tiona, Tyan, and Ace cut through the beast's thick hide. Once the thing passed them, Bell unleashed Welf's magic sword as well. All of his attacks hit home, and the beast let out a ferocious roar as it was engulfed in a sea of flames. Things went quiet after that. The column of smoke rose from where the behemoth should have been. "Was that it?" Tyan asked doubtfully. "We won." Tiona exclaimed happily, much more gullible than her sister. "This can't be," Riveria muttered, unable to believe that such a beast would fall like this, especially since it should have had special resistance against magic. However, that's what happened. The behemoth was nowhere to be seen, and soon the whole group began to celebrate their victory, although there was obviously still some bad blood between Ace and Riveria. Currently, the twins were talking to her while Riveria was still straining her eyes, trying to see beyond the smokescreen of their attacks, unable to believe her victory for the moment. Bell was about to talk to her when all of a sudden, he started feeling terrible all of a sudden. He doubled over and saw the most vivid images flash through his head. Almost like a bad premonition, he saw Riveria's body being pierced and ripped apart. He couldn't explain it, but he felt like he had just seen his future. "Bell?" Riveria asked, worried for him as she watched him double over in pain. However, before she had a chance to talk to him further, Bell rushed out and threw her to the ground. Just in time to dodge an incoming horn. The behemoth's horn. The beast that should have been dead emerged from the ground like a giant mole. Thanks to Bell's premonition, he was able to prevent Riveria from being impaled, but that didn't mean they had completely avoided the attack. However, they were knocked vertically into the air by the thing, easily giving the behemoth enough time to bite them. Once its powerful jaw closed, the only thing left of the two adventurers was a stray arm that had belonged to Bell. A scream was heard. It was Ace who witnessed the scene along with the twins. The three of them could only stare at the arm on the ground. The human it should have been attached to was now gone. Now that the beast had reappeared, they finally saw the extent of the damage they'd done. It was almost nothing. Their full power attacks had merely scratched its skin, and it didn't even show any burns from the magic it had been hit with. The three remaining members of the group thought the same thing. "We can't kill that thing." As much as it hurt, they knew they stood no chance. It was a lesson they'd learned the hard way in the dungeon. They knew when they were outmatched by an opponent and when they'd have to run for their lives. That moment was now. The three of them stood up and began to run away from the beast, with tears in their eyes for Bell and Riveria. The behemoth, of course, had no plans to let them leave. It gave chase almost immediately. Now, thanks to the behemoth's weakness, its enormous weight caused it to slowly decelerate. The three managed to dodge the beast's attacks, but it was actually useless. They weren't fast enough to escape, and there was no point in trying to hide from a beast that could spontaneously destroy and four mountains. This wasn't a battle. It was a cat playing with its food. Right now, they could still dodge the beast's powerful attacks, but one hit from the monster and they'd be done for good, and no one could tell which side would lose their stamina faster. At that moment they heard a bell. It was a different sound than the one the twins had heard when they were fighting the Leviathan alongside Bell, but it had the same effect. The sound, heavily muffled for some reason, rekindled the flames within the hearts of those who heard them. It signaled their counterattack. The behemoth was, of course, puzzled by the strange noise whose origin it couldn't pinpoint, but the three remaining adventurers it had been chasing didn't give it the chance to stare much longer as, contrary to their previous actions, they were now charging straight at the beast. From then on, the real battle began. Ace used her wind armor to draw the behemoth's attention and continually outmaneuvered it, giving the Amazons the opportunity to attack the beast's legs with all their power. Of course, they all barely damaged the beast. It was almost as if they were just wasting their time. The behemoth seemed to pay no more attention to them than to a few small flies that were bothering it. However, they managed to temporarily divert the beast's attention from the sound of the slowly growing bell. A few minutes passed before the behemoth let out a roar filled with pain. The struggling adventurers knew immediately that they had succeeded. Of course, there was no guarantee that the bell they heard was really what they thought it was, but nevertheless, they had believed. They had believed that Bell and Riveria were still alive. They had believed that the two hadn't given up and hadn't despaired, and they were rewarded for their faith. As soon as the behemoth let out its mighty cry of pain, it collapsed to the ground, soon crumbling and bursting into ash. Revealing Bell and Riveria's severely burned rear ends, along with many black bones. Bell was unconscious and lying in Riveria's arms, obviously completely exhausted. His Argonaut ability had once again worked in overdrive to finish off this beast. Bell was still bleeding profusely from his amputated arm. Ace and the twins ran towards them, but Riveria was quick to shout at them, "Go and get me his arm." Anything but calm at this point. The three of them were strangely puzzled by Riveria's despair, but nonetheless, Ace rushed to retrieve Bell's torn arm, knowing that Riveria likely had a way to do something about it, but it would have to be fast. Once Ace had reached for her arm, she pulled a small bottle from her chest, attached to a chain around her neck. It was a trinket, a good luck charm of sorts, that she had received before they left Arario. It had been a gift from Ina, Bell's advisor at the guild. Since Riveria and her mother had been very close, Ina approached her and gave her this item, telling her to use it in times of need. Of course, with her vast intellect and years of experience, Riveria could immediately tell what it was. Mermaid blood. A rare item said to be able to heal almost any wound. "Please work," Riveria muttered as she opened the bottle and poured its contents onto Bell's arm, which she was holding up to where it should have been. And truly, the drop element lived up to its name when it reattached the missing arm. At that, Riveria couldn't help but shed tears of happiness. The others also joined in and couldn't help but hug the two of them. Both were badly burned all over their bodies by the behemoth's digestive fluids, and their clothes were in tatters, but they were still alive. Back then, in the behemoth's stomach, neither of them had been prepared to accept defeat, not while there was still life within them. Bell immediately began charging at Argonaut, not yet knowing what he would attack with, while Riveria had begun casting her healing magic on the two of them, continuously regenerating their bodies as they were devoured. Of course, that didn't ease the pain in the slightest, but they both managed to endure it without ever losing focus. However, that healing left them with a bit of trouble. Riveria couldn't sing like that. Or well, she could, but not while simultaneously healing them both. Not that it would have been a good idea anyway after all, the behemoth was resistant to magic, meaning that even if they had been able to kill it with a blast from inside its body, the magic would be trapped inside and they'd be caught in the swirling storm of magic. To solve this problem, they didn't actually do anything. Instead, the solution came to them by itself. The behemoth's stomach had filled with many black bones, the bones of the ancient behemoth. The powerful jaw had crushed and swallowed them for some reason, but these things were incredibly resilient. Sure, they had already shrunk a bit, but nonetheless, they were still there, whereas a human would be completely digested in just a few minutes. Bell, despite having only one arm, picked up one of the bones with a sharp point. Riveria helped him as she continued her healing, knowing that Bell couldn't carry something so heavy with just one arm. Then they attacked. They targeted a large, violently pulsing light inside the behemoth, something they could only assume had been its magic stone. And that had led to the current situation. After that, the five of them, Tiona carrying the still unconscious Bell and Ace helping the injured Riveria by lending her a shoulder to lean on, headed to the carriage. They placed Bell in the carriage and then left. Once everyone was seated inside the carriage, the horses well enough trained to follow the path on their own, Riveria broke the silence that had enveloped the group since the moment the battle had ended. Ace, I'm so disappointed in you. You almost killed us all with your selfishness, Riveria said to Ace, who was hanging her head in despair because she knew it was the truth. However, unexpectedly, Riveria continued, but well, although it wasn't right in any way, I guess I haven't been very honest with you either. Perhaps things would have been different if I had been more open with you. I apologize. At that, Ace couldn't help but mutter, Riveria unable to believe that Riveria would say something like that. I believe this mission was made much more difficult by my own lack of leadership skills. Being a leader doesn't just mean commanding a group in battle. It also means sensing the concerns of its members and trying to resolve them. It seems I still have much to learn from Finn. I apologize again, he continued. Of course, the other three women were completely taken aback by this, as they hadn't expected her to be so understanding. To prevent this from happening again, I'll be honest with you from now on. Please ask me anything that's bothering you, she told them, intending to clear up this whole mess so that the relationship between her and Ace would be better again. Reluctantly and blushing, she added, I guess I'll even answer a question about my masturbation habits, as she looked away in embarrassment. The other three were also nervous about the upcoming topic, though they thought that, perhaps now that the only child in the group was still unconscious, it might be the only time they could talk freely about this. And then. Well, in that case tell me, why did you do it? So often, I mean, I didn't think you were the type to do it so much, and I also didn't realize you did it when we were on an expedition. Ace asked with a blush. Riveria began, trying to form a sentence without stuttering. Let me explain it from the beginning, okay? Maybe you'll understand then. You asked me several times what I was doing, going to the dungeon during my free time, when I normally would never do that, Riveria began to explain, the other three hanging on her every word now. The truth is I have a boyfriend, Riveria admitted. That's the reason why I go to the dungeon all the time. To meet with him secretly since we can't meet on the surface. The eyes of the three girls listening to her visibly widened. Tiona and Tyan were especially interested in this, as they loved this kind of gossip and girl talk about things like love. But really, in all this time, they had never expected Riveria of all people to have a lover, let alone be so secretive and embarrassed about it. Their trusted leader and maternal figure was now pure blushing maiden in their eyes all of a sudden. So what does that have to do with masturbating? Ace asked, still unable to make the connection. Of course, Tiona and Tyan were much quicker here. Before Riveria could even open her mouth to reply, Tyan already blurted out, that simple, Ace. Every time she thinks about him, she gets the urge to touch herself. It's the same for me with Finn, only I'm not as desperate for him yet. Needless to say, being called desperate by none other than Tyan didn't exactly help Riveria feel less ashamed of herself. More importantly, who is this lover of yours? Is he tall? Or manly? Oh, is he even an elf? How old is he? Tiona asked, clearly eager to know more about this love story. However, before Riveria could answer, Tyan interrupted her with her own questions, her questions much less innocent than Tiona's. When you're that desperate when you think about him, you must have done well. How was he? Did you like it? Does he have good technique? How big is he down there? He asked. Of course, Ace was completely lost at this point. Sure, she'd already been part of Tiona and Tyan's girl talk, along with many other girls in the family, but this was a new intensity, even for her. However, Riveria planned to answer them truthfully. Oh okay, wait a second. I can't answer when you bombard me with questions like that. Riveria interrupted the twins, still with a new wave of questions. Riveria let out a sigh. Well, I guess I said I'd answer all your questions, so I can't back out now. One thing, though no one, and I really mean no one can hear about this, okay? I don't want to be the talk of the town, Riveria told them with an embarrassed groan, to which the twins gave her a grave nod. After all, a conversation between girls was a sacred and secret conversation that should never be revealed to outsiders. The only thing I can't tell you is his name. Whether or not that man wants to be known as my lover to you is something I can't decide on my own, and since I can barely ask him right now, that will have to remain a secret for the time being. And no, I'm not going to give in here so you can shut your mouth again, Tiona. He began before continuing, tall. Well, I wouldn't say he's exceptionally tall, at least he's smaller than me. Manly, well, I guess he usually isn't, but he does have his manly moments, and no, he's not an elf. He's a human, if you must know. The nervous elf then moved on to answering Tyan's more lascivious questions. Why yeah, we already did it already. Multiple times Riveria admitted, causing the two twins to squeal in delight, prompting a what's so funny about this? From Rivera. Go on, Tyan demanded, not bothering to explain her burst of feminine joy. Well, it was good. I definitely enjoyed it, Riveria replied to Tyan's second question, however, that of course wasn't enough for the Amazon. Oh, come on. Give us more details. What do you mean he was good? Why was he good? What did he do? Tyan demanded, causing Riveria's blush to deepen even further. It was a strange scene indeed, the two young Amazons towering over the much older Riveria, red-faced with embarrassment, while the sword princess sat a little further away, listening to their conversation almost equally nervously. Riveria needed a little time to find the words to describe it. Well, I guess you could say I was eager to learn at least. At first I didn't have that great a technique, but it's improving quickly, and for now when we do it, I feel like it's touching my body like a highly skilled musician would play their instrument. Once again, this elicited a feminine squeal from the twins. However, Riveria tried to ignore it, instead telling them, well, other than that your stamina is incredible. If you wanted to, you could leave me a total mess. The twins' eyes widened at that. Tiona couldn't help but burst out, is it Otter? What? No. Riveria retorted, though in reality, it was a reasonable thought, after all, there weren't many people who could survive a level 6, now even a level 7, adventure. However, Riveria's words seemed quite credible. At least she wasn't the least bit nervous when she rejected the idea. Of course, that only made the twins keep throwing suggestions at him. So was it Bet? Oh, or that Alan guy? Or maybe Gareth? Or did you steal Finn from me? And no. It's not anyone on that list, so stop looking at me, Tyan. He's below me in level, he was the whole time. Even now, he's not even level 6. Riveria told them. Of course, the twins found that hard to believe, but before they could throw any more suggestions around the room, Riveria told them, I told you I wouldn't give you her name, so stop it. That made the twins admit defeat. Finally, Riveria answered the last question, her embarrassment even more evident now, after she had just taken a backseat to talking about her potential lovers. And yes, I guess he's pretty well equipped. I mean I've never seen any other Hennis before, but at least he can reach deep inside me. For the third time, the twins squealed with delight at her words. Once again, Tyan began bombarding her with questions, even more lewd than the last, but before Riveria could answer, Bell let out a moan as he slowly brought a hand to his head, apparently having already woken up. What happened? Bell asked, looking at each of the girls surrounding him at this moment. Tyan and Tiona were already back in their seats, showing no signs of what had just happened, while Ace and Riveria weren't as calm. Both were still the color of a tomato, and Ace couldn't help but mutter, what just happened actually in a daze. Riveria regained her composure with a light cough and replied, thanks to you, we managed to kill the behemoth. Once again, this entire group was saved thanks to you, Bell. You have my gratitude. Bell smiled at him and said, no, everyone helped with that. After a week, the group finally returned to Arario. Just like on their trip to the behemoth, Riveria couldn't help but touch herself every night, though things were different now. Unlike at the beginning of the journey, Ace no longer seemed to care now that she at least had an explanation. However, that didn't mean it was any better. Now, since Bell was asleep, Tiona and Tyan would walk up to Riveria and ask her to talk to them while she played with herself. What are you thinking about? You must be thinking about your beloved, right? What do you want to do with him? Were questions she was frequently asked, but Riveria never answered them in too much detail, too ashamed to admit such things. Tyan, in turn, would talk about her own fantasies involving Finn to lessen Riveria's embarrassment, but that usually backfired. At some point, Riveria had admitted to them that she didn't just masturbate for her own pleasure every day, but that she was actually preparing for something special. Upon hearing that, the twins demanded to know what it was and how exactly she was touching herself to prepare. Riveria had been too shy and ashamed of herself to tell them, which led to a situation where both twins were trying to steal Riveria's blanket to see what she was doing underneath. It had been quite difficult to find an excuse when they woke Bell up with their noise. Anyway, when they arrived in Arario, they were quickly greeted by Loki and the rest of the family, all of whom, of course, wanted to know what had happened. Along with his family, they also informed some guild officials and Moss what had happened, once again prompting applause when it was revealed that they had defeated another legendary beast. Right after that, their statuses updated, though the only notable thing was that Bell had reached level 5 and gained a new skill. The particular skill seemed to be connected to what had happened before the behemoth swallowed him and Riveria. It was called Lover's Premonition, and it seemed to allow him to sense whenever Riveria was in danger. Of course, needless to say, he earned a bit of ridicule from Loki because of it, though Riveria had it even worse, as her status had been upgraded after Bell's. Overall, all of the individual members' stats increased a lot, but it wasn't enough for any of the newly leveled adventurers to achieve another level, especially since Bell had done most of the work this time. Anyway, it was decided that they would have a big party 3 days from now, and that each individual member of the team would have days off until then, so they could calm down after their trip and fight. That, of course, was a perfect opportunity for Riveria to finally give Bell his reward. The first thing he did when he returned and had some free time was to contact a certain artisan, the same one who had made him a certain piece of lingerie quite some time ago and to whom he had given another order before he had left it on his trip. Fortunately, that artisan had already finished her order, and since Riveria paid so well, she had even given her another item, telling Riveria, "I can already tell what you're going to do with this new lingerie, and I have to tell you, I didn't take you for such a naughty girl anyway, take it. Believe me, you'll need it." Of course, that had caused Riveria to blush in embarrassment and even more so to pay the woman even better this time, since she really didn't want anyone to know about this. The next day, she used a small piece of paper to invite Bell to the dungeon. Since he was a level 5 and finally had his own room, she could simply slip it under his door. Now, she might wonder why Riveria didn't just visit him at night instead of hosting a meeting in the dungeon, but long after the incident on their trip, she'd rather not take any risks and not have anyone else hear her moans. Of course, Tyan and Tiona were still trying to catch her alone at any moment and have another lewd conversation with the poor elf, but well, since there were almost always people in the house or on the streets along with Riveria, she managed to avoid them pretty well. At night, before heading to the dungeon, she made sure to put on her new outfit under her normal clothes. Of course, she put the item the craftswoman had given her in a bag and checked whether or not Tiona or Tyan or even Aze were following her before heading into the dungeon. Bell also headed into the dungeon behind her, though he entered a little later, just as she had instructed. For some reason, he seemed to sense someone watching him, though he shrugged it off as if it were his imagination. Soon enough, Bell arrived on the 18th floor and easily found Riveria at their usual meeting place. Unlike when he'd gone to the dungeon, she was no longer wearing her usual clothes, but had instead covered her body with a long green hood. "Hi." He greeted her, eliciting a shy, nervous, but happy smile from her as she replied, "Hi. Why are you so shy? Is something wrong?" he asked when he noticed her blushing face. "Well, I remember the Denitus. When you asked me why I was so happy and I told you you'd find out soon," she asked, to which he responded with a nod. I heard you talking to Freya back then, and it really touched me, you know that's why I was so happy back then," he admitted with a loving look. "Oh, that I already forgot about that, haha, well, it's a little embarrassing now that you mention it," Bell said, sheepishly rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, it was very sweet to me, that's why I wanted to thank you for saying those things. You could have chosen to go with her, you know. Freya is the goddess of beauty after all, but despite that, you chose me, that's why I'd like to thank you," Riveria said to him in a loving voice, now free of all the shame from before. Thank you," Bell could only ask. "Yes, tonight I would like to reward you, just as I did after the war game and after the battle with the Leviathan," Riveria told him, finally taking a step back and letting her hood fall away from her body, revealing her new piece of lingerie specifically for this occasion, a pure white set of bra, panties, and matching thigh-high stockings that were tied to her panties. Above all else, it was so white that it made her look like a priceless jewel, a rare, poor, and innocent maiden, but despite that appearance, her outfit held a surprise that was anything but innocent. Lemon skipped. After about 3 hours of sleep, a bath, and healing magic for Riveria later. "I'll go ahead this time," Bell told Riveria, who could barely move. "Don't worry too much about me. I'm a level 5 now, you know." But those words, he turned to leave. He'd make sure to eliminate as many monsters as possible for the exhausted Riveria on the way up. Wait, he heard Riveria's faint voice behind him. "Yes?" he asked as he turned around. Now that Riveria had sobered up, she was even more shy and embarrassed than before the whole incident, but she wanted to say something nonetheless. No, she had to say something. I love you, Bell, she told him, her cheeks bright red. Bell gave her a bright cheerful smile and, of course, replied, I love you too, Riveria. After that he left. Riveria's stomach filled with butterflies and she felt like she was taking some kind of drug. Those words she'd always wanted to hear, she'd finally heard them. Half an hour later. Riveria, now at least a little more awake and refreshed, packed her things and headed to the 17th floor, planning to ascend the dungeon again. It was a relatively smooth climb, despite her exhaustion, until… Otter? Riveria asked, finding the other level 7 adventurer from Arario in front of her, blocking the path to the next floor of the dungeon. His only response was, there's someone who wants to talk to you. Final chapter. This one's about Riveria in a rather scandalous bikini. Is everything okay, Riveria? Bell shouted, worried about why Riveria was taking so long to change. Riveria, on the other hand, slowly peeked out from behind the tree she had shifted behind to look at Bell, her face and ears red as a tomato. Currently, the two were on the 18th floor at the lake where they used to meet, though today was a special day as Bell had brought an outfit he wanted to see Riveria in. Since she had previously accepted his suggestion to dress up for him, she had of course accepted his outfit, but now… What is it? Bell asked. Tht, this is so do I really have to use this? Riveria asked, hiding behind the large tree. Yes. I really want to see you in it. I'm sure you look great. Bell exclaimed excitedly. Seeing her excitement, Riveria could only let out a dejected sigh of defeat as she clumsily stepped out from behind her tree, revealing the bikini Bell had brought her. It was scandalous, to say the least. Honestly, that thing could barely be considered clothing. The bikini bottoms seemed to be made purely of strings and they were way too small. Since she had just put it on, it wasn't an issue yet, but she was sure that whoever had created this damn thing had specifically designed it to ride up in her crotch with every step so that her crotch would be revealed even more than it already was. She really should have done without this part of the bikini. The bikini top wasn't much better either. It didn't have the normal cups you'd expect to hide her breasts, instead, it just had two small plates that sat on top of her nipples. And those plates were tiny too. So tiny that Riveria's beautiful pink areola could be easily seen hiding behind it. It could barely cover her nipples. Not to mention, if Riveria were to make any sudden movements or run, her tits would either slip off or rip the bikini top apart. This is really embarrassing, it would even be better to be completely naked than this, the bright red elf groaned in embarrassment. However, Bell, on the other hand, loved it, which was easily visible thanks to the prominent bulge in his trunks. But it's so sexy. I'm so glad you put it on me. Bell gave her a lewd yet happy smile, a smile that Riveria simply couldn't get mad at, no matter how hard she tried. With slow steps, careful not to cause any wardrobe malfunctions, she inched toward the water. After all, she'd have to get into the lake too, not just show off her slutty bikini. Of course, even her slow, careful steps couldn't stop her bikini bottom from rising to her crotch and fitting into her folds and buttocks. It was almost as if she were naked down there now, only with the added frustration of that piece of clothing constantly rubbing against her in quite erotic and even pleasurable ways. Despite that intentionally flawed design, Riveria entered the water, not that she had to swim far from the start, because Bell basically pounced on her like a rabbit in heat the moment she entered his range. The only thing that could be heard from the elf in response to his advance, besides a few moans, of course, was, God, if you were planning on ripping him to pieces anyway, why did I have to dress like that? This one is about Riveria and Bell doing a little rolleplaying. Bell's heart pounded in his chest as he stood in front of Riveria's room. She had told him to come for a surprise since, for some reason, the two of them had gotten so lucky today that not a single person other than these two was inside Twilight Manor today. Yes, they had the entire house to themselves. Needless to say, they would take advantage of such a situation in one way or another. Bell knocked on Riveria's door and entered once she gave her approval. What he found really excited him. Riveria had taken the opportunity to dress up as a schoolgirl. And it was really cute. It was a typical sailor uniform, though there was clearly a sexual intent behind it, as the skirt was definitely much shorter than intended and the blouse left her belly exposed. Despite those obviously slutty elements, Riveria still looked cute, especially with the usual blush that showed on her face due to her slight embarrassment at wearing this type of outfit. This type of outfit brought out Riveria's youthful side, or well, rather, it emphasized it, since, despite her age, she was still quite innocent and young-minded, at least when it came to everything related to hex. Hello Mr. Cranel, she greeted him, which puzzled him for a moment. Why would she call him by his last name, he wondered. However, before he could say anything, she asked, what's wrong? Don't you want to start today's lesson, sir? Now Belle understood what she had in mind, and it made her much cuter. Honestly, it was a strange idea. The capable and knowledgeable Riveria was the shy and innocent schoolgirl, and Bell was her teacher. Honestly, it was a total role reversal. Nonetheless, Bell liked the idea. "Oh, yes, I'm sorry, Miss Riveria. Would you mind reminding me? What was the topic of our last lesson?" he asked in a fake voice. Obviously, he was very bad at acting, but again, this wasn't about the act and more about what would come after this. It was true that Riveria had a hard time not bursting into laughter when she heard Bell speaking in such an awkward manner, but she somehow managed it. Instead of laughing, she replied, if I remember correctly, that must have been oral hex, sir," faking an innocent and pure smile, as if she were actually just a schoolgirl who didn't even know what oral hex really meant. "Oh, yeah, I remember now. Now tell me, did you do your homework?" Bell asked. Homework? What homework did you give me again?" Riveria asked nervously, as any student would if they'd forgotten their homework. Riveria really was a natural at acting. "Oh, seems you forgot. Well, your homework was to study the content of our last lesson, so you'd be prepared for my pop quiz today, but well, since you didn't, I think a punishment is in order," Bell told him, now more in character and less awkward and laughable. "And what did you have in mind?" Riveria asked with perfect acting, which made her sound very anxious and afraid of the punishment she might face. Bell sat on Riveria's bed, patting her lap. "Come here, you've earned yourself a spanking, lady." "Yes, sir," Riveria said dejectedly, though here her performance seemed to falter a little, as it was quite clear that she was quite enjoying how Bell was taking the initiative. Obediently, he bent over Bell's lap. He immediately lifted her skirt, which was already too short. "No panties? You naughty, naughty girl," he said when he discovered she wasn't wearing anything under that skirt of hers. "I'm sorry, sir. I've been a very bad girl," Riveria replied, clearly playing further into the cliché. Soon enough, Bell raised his hand and dropped it onto Riveria's bottom moments later. "HNNGH." Riveria let out a rather strange sound in response. It could have been a howl due to the unexpected force with which she was hit or a groan of surprise, it wasn't entirely clear, although the groan seemed more likely, since it would be quite difficult for Bell to hurt a level 7 unless he was the same level, or at least just one level lower. Bell then continued his punishment, spanking her little bottom until it was bright red and covered in handprints. Of course, Riveria's thighs were a wet mess at this point, something Bell noticed but chose to ignore for now. Instead, he simply said, "I hope you've learned your lesson. Now stand up and let's begin the test I mentioned earlier." "Yes, sir, I'll behave myself from now on," Riveria told him, though with how flushed she was and how loudly she was panting with needy lust, there was no chance she actually meant that well, it's not like she was ever going to say that anyway, since it was just a role she played. He then got up from Bell's lap and asked, "So what will this test be?" Bell smiled slightly at her as he opened his pants to take out his cock, already hard and eager to go, after all the spanking it hadn't just been torture for Riveria. "Well, since our last lesson was oral hex, can't you imagine it yet?" Riveria smiled as she knelt down. She immediately began eagerly working Bell's cock with her mouth, while one of her hands began massaging her needy little hole. However, Bell used one leg to kick her hand, causing a confused look from her. "No, no, Miss Riveria. Haven't you been a naughty girl? I don't think naughty girls play with their hussy," he told her, clearly enjoying this dominance. Riveria, on the other hand, too greedy to break free now, was about to protest, however, before she could say anything, Bell added. "Unless, well, if you can prove to me that you're a good girl, then I think I can help you with all that hexual frustration, and what better way to prove it than by getting a perfect score on this test." Finally understanding what Bell had in mind, she redoubled her efforts on his penis, aiming to give him the best blowjob he'd ever had. Riveria and Bell alone in Twilight Manor, doing lewd things everywhere. "I can't believe we actually have the whole house to ourselves today," Bell said, with Riveria lying in his arms snuggling against him. They were currently in Riveria's room after a particularly heated hex session. Of course, the first thing they used their newfound freedom for was to buck each other silly, not in an open-air place like the dungeon, but in a real room, but what else should they do now? "But that's the way it is. We were lucky, I guess," Riveria replied. She, too, wanted to make the most of this special situation. "Well, anything you'd like to do?" he asked Bell, adding, I don't even care if it's something bad, you know." Bell smiled at her. He couldn't help but say jokingly, now, don't act like I'm the only one who wants to do kinky things, well, we have the house to ourselves." That comment, of course, made Riveria blush, though she didn't deny it. "Well, I guess I have some ideas," Bell told him. From there, their lascivious adventures around the mansion began. His first stop was the weapons room. "What are we doing here?" Riveria couldn't help but ask, after all, a gun vault was probably one of the least hexy places she could think of. However, Bell just smiled as he grabbed a long spear from one of the walls. "Oh, nothing, just needed to get this thing here," he said, still not explaining his plan. He then led her to the dining room. Most of the tables were empty, only a few of them still had food on them, though it wasn't leftovers, but raw, unprocessed vegetables, albeit washed. In the dining room, he walked to his usual seat. Riveria usually sat at a separate table on a small platform where the entire room was gathered. She ate there with Loki, Finn, and Gareth. Personally, she didn't really like it, as almost the entire room was focused on her. When he reached the table, Bell stuck the big spear into the table. Riveria's eyes widened slightly in surprise. What are you doing?" she asked, unable to understand him at all. Bell just gave him a lascivious smile as he responded by asking a question. "Riveria, have you ever thought about becoming a stripper?" Lemon skipped. He then asked her to bring him breakfast in bed and she sat idly by while he ate. Occasionally, he used one of his hands to fondle her bottom with delight, which she simply accepted, as a well-trained servant should. Of course, she personally prepared breakfast, though she had to go down to the kitchen to prepare it, which meant she had run into quite a few family members. It wasn't anything new for them to see Riveria in her maid uniform. After all, she had been Belle's maid for quite some time. Nonetheless, even if their amazement at seeing her like this faded, they were still jealous of Belle. Whenever Riveria passed by, they couldn't help but stare, well, the men, anyway. They couldn't help but stare at her barely covered tits and her juicy ass, which constantly poked out like a boar offering anal hex. That was thanks to her high heels. Those shoes were a real nuisance to her, but she wore them nonetheless. After all, that was what her master wanted. Back in bed, after Bell finished his breakfast and Riveria put away all the dishes, Riveria asked, "How would you like to have morning hex today, master?" Bell thought for a moment before answering, "I think I want to do anal today." Riveria simply responded with, "As you wish, master," before turning around and lifting her skirt to allow Bell access to her back door. Riveria in a bunny suit. "Hello and welcome, dear customer, to the Hex Casino," Riveria announced cheerfully after Belle sat down at a table she had prepared. "Let me quickly explain the rules of this special casino. You and I play a round of cards and continue until I win once. For every win you can get before then, you can make a request. Oh, and yes, anything goes," he explained to Belle. This was a special gift from her to him for Belle's birthday. Bell himself was quite surprised to walk into his room and find a bunny, Riveria, but he was very excited and eager to play. The first round was a fairly easy victory for Bell, almost as if Riveria had planned it. After all, what kind of gift would this be if he'd already lost the first round? "Congratulations, customer, you won this round. Now tell me, what do you want?" she asked happily, celebrating her victory. Bell thought for a moment before saying, "I want you to take your tits out. I want to suck them." With an embarrassed but excited face. Riveria didn't even flinch at his request. After all, she'd said anything goes, which meant she'd prepared for something much worse. Lemon skipped. Finally the fifth round of cards began and when Riveria lost again. Damn it. Why do I keep losing? How lucky are you? Now first of all, that wasn't very dirty of you, and second I thought we'd continue until you won once, so why don't you prepare for the next round while I think about my wish? Bell calmed down. And from then on they played until the night, Riveria fulfilling request after request with no signs of stopping. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.